confrontations with people in a mental health crisis. Rena Palta of member station KPCC examined whether officers in Los Angeles are being too aggressive with people struggling with mental illness.
Her sister Nancy says it was a regular Wednesday.
That morning, she had came to my room and said she was going out job hunting.
Jasmine, small but athletic, was a high school tennis star. After college, she worked in sports retail, but she also battled schizophrenia.
She felt that people were plotting to get her in trouble. That was a constant symptom of her illness.
Nancy didn't know on this morning Jasmine was carrying around a small hammer. She'd become paranoid someone was trying to hurt her. She walked into the Asian Pacific Family Center.
And she said,
Robert Finnerty is Nancy Ng's attorney. He says Jasmine was sitting in the lobby for hours, but clinic staff couldn't get her to talk to them or give up the hammer.
We have a low-level threat emergency situation.
That's Dr. Glenn Masuda, the clinic's director, talking to dispatchers at the local sheriff's station. He explains Jasmine's suffering from psychosis, but she isn't acting violently.
Waiting in the main lobby, very calmly with a ball-peen hammer in her lap. You don't want it to escalate at this point.
The lobby was evacuated, except for Jasmine. According to an investigation by the LA District Attorney, 4 deputies arrived. One pulled out a taser, another his gun, and walked into the lobby. They yelled at Jasmine to put down the hammer. This is a pretty typical police move, to give loud, authoritative, and clear orders, and then expect the person to comply.
They're coming at it from a perspective that tends, I think, to overstress rationality.
William Terrell is a former military police officer and current criminal justice professor at Michigan State. He says normal tactics don't really work when someone's in mental health crisis. They might not even be hearing the commands. They might just be hearing loud, angry voices and getting scared.
And it doesn't seem that the officer is taking that into account, that they're just saying, well, this person's not listening to me, therefore I'm going to tase them.
An analysis by KPCC found in more than 40 cases since 2010, officers in Los Angeles County shot people in mental health crisis. Many think that number's low. In 12 of those shootings, the cops were primarily called in to help someone who was a threat to themselves. Some were unarmed, some had a gun, and some were armed with other things, like a knife, or in Jasmine Ng's case, when Ng raised that hammer, Deputy Daniel Escada shot 2 taser darts. According to the police account, she charged towards them. Deputy Brian Vance fired his gun, hitting Jasmine twice. Los Angeles District Attorney Jackie Lacey says too many people in mental health crisis are getting shot by police. She says it's a catch-22.
There's no one else to call but the police. The police respond. You have to hope that the officer who responds is well-trained. And if they're not, then you may be looking at seeing your loved one carry out in a body bag.
The answer, she says, is a big shift in how police are trained. She wants all police in LA County to take a minimum 2-day training on dealing with people in mental health crisis to de-escalate confrontations. In Jasmine Ng's case, a department panel found the deputies involved should have done just that. One was taken off patrol for 2 years, but all of them kept their jobs. The deputies involved declined to comment. Ultimately, LA County Sheriff Jim McDonnell says the shooting was justified.
A person with a hammer, no matter what their size is, can kill you. You've got, milliseconds in some cases to respond. It's a giant decision, and you go with your training.
LA County paid Ng's family a $1.85 million wrongful death settlement. Nancy Ng, her sister, says if it was fear the deputies felt when Jasmine came towards them, they weren't the only ones.
She was afraid. And that's the hardest thing is she was killed for being scared.
For NPR News, I'm Rena Palta in Los Angeles.
And this is WNYC in New York. I'm Sean Carlson. After 10 years without a wage increase, early childhood educators at city-funded nonprofit centers are pushing for a raise. They say it's unfair they make less than public school employees who work in comparable settings with comparable experience. David Nalcenti is the executive director of the Union Settlement Association, which includes a network of early childhood centers. He says the pay disparity diminishes the work the centers do to prepare young children for their educational path.
I really don't think that our public school systems will ever achieve standards that they want to unless children enter them ready to learn.
Representing those employees, DC 7 and the city are currently in the process of contract negotiations. The city was not able to be reached for comment. Police Commissioner William Bratton is not a fan of hoverboards. Not only are they technically illegal within the 5 boroughs, but in a press conference today, he said they're downright dangerous.
Being quite frank with you, I think anybody buys one of those things is out of their mind. That both for seriously, in terms of the spontaneity of them catching on fire.
Bratton added it's hard enough to walk down the crowded streets of New York City, let alone hover. Earlier today, 2 Queens lawmakers, State Senator Jose Peralta and Assemblyman David Weprin, announced they were backing a bill to legalize hoverboards, which they say is a necessary step to regulate the devices. For the rest of tonight, areas of drizzle and fog and clouds. It'll start to clear up overnight, though, with a low around 37 tonight. For tomorrow, Wednesday, chance of sprinkles, mostly in the late morning, partly sunny with a high near 49. Looking ahead to tomorrow night, rain is likely. It'll be cloudy with a low around 44. It's still 40 and cloudy right now in Central Park. This is WNYC at 10:06.
Judges, baseball umpires, and loan officers constantly have to make judgments. Does the person before me qualify for asylum? Is the pitch a ball or a strike? Should I approve this loan application? Since all these people are human, they make mistakes, and our social science correspondent, Jonathan Johnson, has come across a mistake that all make, and some research about that. Hi, Shankar.
Hi, Steve.
And the mistake is what?
Well, the mistake lies in seeing patterns where none exist. It's actually a common error, Steve. We often want to impose a sense of order on things that are actually random. We see this in casinos all the time. In fact, the phenomenon is called the gambler's fallacy. If you toss a coin up 5 times and it comes down tails 5 times in a row, you have a feeling that the next coin flip has to come down heads.
It must be heads this time. Put all my money on heads.
Exactly.
Sure.
Now, in reality, of course, there's a 50-50 chance the next coin flip is going to be heads. Each coin flip is completely independent, and strings of heads or strings of tails are not surprising, but we're often surprised when they do occur.
Okay, so how does that apply to this situation where people are judging balls and strikes or judging human beings in a courtroom?
Well, many analyses of the gambler's fallacy have typically been lab experiments. Kelly Shue at the University of Chicago, along with her colleagues Daniel Chen and Toby Moskowitz, they analyzed 150,000 rulings by judges in immigration court. So these were judges hearing asylum cases. The researchers analyzed how often does an asylum approval follow a rejection or vice versa. Now, each case, obviously, has no bearing on the next case, so how judges rule on one case should not affect how they rule on the next case. Here's Kelly Shue.
What we find is that judges tend to deny asylum if they granted asylum to the previous case, and the opposite. So they tend to grant asylum if they just denied asylum to the previous case.
Whoa, so it's like that person with the coin flipping it heads or tails. They're thinking on some level, sometimes if I just had tails, the next one maybe ought to come up heads.
That's right. Now, actually, if you ask the judges, they will probably tell you that each case has no bearing on the next. But I think the gambler's fallacy often operates outside of people's conscious awareness. So very subtly, it's biasing people into making judgments. The researchers find the same thing in a separate analysis of nearly 1 million pitches in Major League Baseball. Umpires have to call a ball or a strike depending on where the ball crosses home plate. And again, this is especially true with close calls. Umpires don't like to call a series of balls or a series of strikes in a row. Gambler's fallacy at work again.
And this is all very subtle. It happens some of the time.
That's right. It happens very rarely, but because you're magnifying this effect over a large number of cases, the net effect can be potentially very large.
You could have games decided or human lives changed in disastrous ways. So what is a solution to this bias then?
Well, as with most biases, Steve, the first step is just to be aware of the bias. But in one experiment that Shue and her colleagues conducted with loan officers in India, they found something that did work. This was a lab experiment where they had loan officers come in, study loan applications, and assess whether to offer a loan. Now, these were loans that had already been issued, so the researchers knew which ones had turned out well and which ones had turned out badly. So they could assess the accuracy of the loan officers' decisions. Researchers gave the loan officers a financial incentive for each correct decision. Here's Kelly Shue.
We find that when the loan officers are given stronger incentives to be accurate, that the magnitude of the gambler's fallacy significantly decreases.
So the thinking here, Steve, is that the financial incentives causes the officers to slow down, think hard, and make a deliberate judgment rather than make a quick intuitive call.
You're saying when some money is put on the line, we take the brain off autopilot and actually think.
So I don't think you can say this applies in every single case. For example, you can't offer financial incentives to judges deciding asylum cases. But in that case, there might be a slightly different solution. The researchers say that varying the kind of cases that the judges see consecutively could help. If the judges feel that each case is sufficiently different from the next, they might be less prone to gambler's fallacy.
Shankar, thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve.
That's NPR's Shankar Vedantam, who joins us regularly to talk about social science research and who explores different ideas about the science of human behavior on his new podcast, Hidden Brain.
Freakonomics. All the recent talk about curbing climate change has many wondering how they can reduce their carbon footprint. Some are switching to more environmentally friendly vehicles. NPR's John Idsey takes a look at what you should know if you're thinking about getting a new car.
I started by calling Sport Chevrolet in Silver Spring, Maryland, to find out what options I might have if I traded in my gas-burning car for an electric or a hybrid. They told me to come by one morning and have a look, so I did, and salesman Norm Crystal started out showing me a small electric car called a Chevy Spark.
Well, it's a commuter vehicle, and we hope that most people who buy it are just driving a certain amount of miles every day. It gets up to 80 miles, so
around 80 miles on a single charge, but no auxiliary gas engine. So when the battery dies, you're stuck. We decided to go for a ride.
Kind of a very quiet start, almost like a spaceship. You know, there's no engine sound when you turn it on.
Other companies also make this kind of four-seater commuter car. The Nissan Leaf was one of the first. Dan Sperling, co-director of the National Center for Sustainable Transportation at the University of California, Davis, says there are a number of things you should consider before you buy an electric car. First, do you just need a car for commuting or other relatively short trips? And what fuel produces the electricity you will use to charge it?
If you buy an electric car in an area where electricity is coal, your car will be the same or possibly even a little worse than a gasoline car.
Ouch. To find out the source of your electrical energy, search EPA Power Profile and enter your zip code. If you'd like an electric car for commuting but need a car with a longer range for weekend trips, you could consider a plug-in hybrid, like the Chevy Volt or the Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid. Sperling says they typically have a 25 to 50-mile all-electric range, enough for most people's commute. Of course, the cost of a new electric or hybrid is also a big consideration. Sperling says these days many are quite affordable, partly because automakers are selling them below cost to try to build a market.
So you can actually get an electric car now for a very low price.
Some are available for less than $20,000 after subtracting a $7,500 tax credit from the federal government, and many states provide tax incentives too. There is another thing to consider in making a decision, and that's the amount of carbon emitted in manufacturing a new car.
10 to 15% of the total greenhouse gas emissions from that car over the life of the car would be associated with the manufacturing.
So, Sperling says, you won't get any overall reduction in your carbon footprint until you've driven your new, more efficient car 10 to 20,000 miles. Another big consideration is how much you drive. Sperling says if you have an older car and you're only driving a few thousand miles a year, it's probably not worth it to upgrade to a cleaner car.
If, however, it's a car that is being used quite a bit, say 10,000 miles a year or more, there's definitely a high payoff, because now there are cars that get 50 miles per gallon compared to your 25.
Of course, the best thing to do for the environment, says Sperling, is walk or bike or use mass transportation. John Idsey, NPR News, Washington.
It is illegal for both men and women to hit their spouses. It's domestic violence. But the law has little to say about what sometimes happens before the physical attacks, psychological and emotional abuse. That is set to change in England with a new law that went into effect today. NPR's Robert Smith reports from London.
Charlotte Neer's husband was controlling, especially when it came to the finances.
When I was pregnant with our first child, I gave up work. My husband He would make me justify every single penny, and I really felt that I was begging him for money.
That wasn't all. He would tell her how she could communicate with her family, would threaten to reveal things about her to her friends, and eventually he tried to strangle her. That's when she left. That's when he was arrested.
Whilst the violence was awful, and it was, it's also the other behaviours that are so confusing.
Because to Nir, all of this abuse, the physical and the emotional, felt like part of something bigger, a complete dominance and control over her life. The new law taking effect today in England and Wales recognizes this, and it's considered groundbreaking. A spouse can now be arrested for all sorts of controlling and coercive behaviors, like keeping someone financially captive, or isolating a partner from their friends and family.
Another example would be the installation of spyware on someone's phone or computer.
This is Claire Laxton. She's with Women's Aid, a domestic abuse charity that pushed the new law.
It's about that micromanaging of someone's life to take away their choices, to take away their freedom.
Someone who does that could face a jail sentence of up to 5 years in prison. Now, Laxton says the law does make clear the difference between a relationship and an abusive relationship. A few demeaning words or a little slap your spouse will not get you arrested. But if there's a pattern of control that impacts the day-to-day freedom of a person, that could be prosecuted. American experts on domestic violence that I spoke to said this could be a real game changer. Evan Stark is researcher he's a professor at Rutgers, and he says this new law better reflects the reality of abusive relationships.
When a woman is being controlled, she can't effectively resist or escape when she is threatened with violence. So what we're really coming to appreciate about this is that if we want to prevent homicides, we need to prevent control.
Stark says only a few U.S. states have put in place laws that recognize these patterns. In most of the U.S., police just wait until the first serious physical assault, and then sometimes it's too late. Charlotte Neer, who escaped from her abusive husband, now runs a shelter in southern England. She doesn't know if the new law will lead to many prosecutions, but she says all of this attention is bound to help.
This will get people to understand what domestic abuse is. Right now, people just think, oh, well, she got hit once in a while.
Police in England and Wales are now being trained to spot the signs of controlling behavior and enforce the law. Robert Smith, NPR News, London.
A hot new toy is a hot mess. Hoverboards, those hands-free two-wheeled motorized scooters, are so hot they are flying off the shelves. And they are also so hot that a handful of them have literally caught fire. Usually when a major brand has a problem with its product, it tries hard to make things right. But as Audrey Quinn of NPR's Planet Money explains, there is no single brand in the case of the hoverboard.
A few weeks ago, Mark Anton was riding his hoverboard in his dorm hallway, showing it off to friends. He's an undergrad at John Carroll University in Ohio, and something seemed off about the hoverboard. It wasn't rolling as smoothly as usual. He kept falling off.
And then it would just be like, beep, 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 beep. And then, like, all its lights came on.
He'd bought it a couple days earlier, some brand he didn't recognize. It looked good. He'd been riding it around to classes. But he'd left it charging overnight, something hoverboard sellers say you should not do.
And then it just stopped, shut down, and then smoke came out. It was like, psh. And then it just like burst into flames, kind of like boop. And like we're just looking at it, and we're like, no way this just happened.
He pulled the fire alarm. The whole dorm had to evacuate. No one was hurt, but now he's that guy whose hoverboard almost burned down the building. The reason these hoverboards catch fire has to do with the way they're made. They come from super efficient manufacturing networks in China, factories that are good at making stuff fast, but not always carefully. They churn out a lot of unbranded gadgets. Lynn Jeffrey studies these manufacturers at the Institute for the Future. It's a nonprofit think tank. She says these are the same people who bring us cheap watches, selfie sticks. And when those things break, well, we don't usually get too surprised or too upset.
When you don't have a well-established or a well-known brand, you also don't have the backup and accountability that you would have with a brand.
And when you don't have that accountability for hoverboards, you get fires. But people have latched onto hoverboards in a way people haven't latched onto a Chinese-created product before. And it's not something these manufacturers are ready for.
They're not in the business of creating long-term relationships with consumers. They're in the business of spinning up fast new products
to meet new consumer demands.
Those long-term relationships with consumers are something Lee Mashmeyer's good at. He's co-founder of the brand consultancy Collins, works with brands like Target and Coke, and he looked a little nervous when I brought a hoverboard into his office.
You know, to be honest, the first thought that hopped into my head was, will it explode?
If you were consulting with this particular hoverboard company, what advice would you give to them at this point, or is it too late?
I mean, I'd love to tackle it. It'd be a very interesting challenge. These people are going to have a very hard time regaining control of the story about their brand and the trust from their consumers.
He says right now there's a hole in the market. These Chinese manufacturers have a terrific product people love, but they're not loving people back. Normally, these factories make a trendy, no-name gadget for one season, then move on. But the hoverboards have been such a breakout hit, Lynn Jeffrey says it might actually pay off for them to embrace branded manufacturing with a safer product.
I think those people are going to come in and clean up. I really do.
She says hoverboards have already proved their market exists. Now, a brand just has to prove we can trust them. Audrey Quinn, NPR News.
Police shoot.
Well, let's turn now to something that, if you've spent a lot of time at a playground recently, you might have suspected. The number of twin births in the U.S. is at an all-time high. That's according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And here to tell us more is Carrie Goldberg, co-host of our home station WBUR's Common Health blog. Welcome, Carrie.
Thanks, Meghna. You can see it on the playground.
You can. So twins are at a record high in America. How high is high?
They are. The new official rate is that for every 1,000 births, there are 33.9 twins.
So roughly 1 in every 30 kids is a twin these days?
That's right. So those are the latest numbers from the CDC. They're up just a little bit from last year, but for historical perspective, that 1 in 30 is up dramatically from 1980 when it was 1 in 60.
Oh, okay. Wow. So a big jump there. I've got some guesses, but what seems to actually be at work here?
So as you may have guessed, first of all, American moms tend to be older than they were. Many of us are in our 30s or 40s when we give birth. And if you're older like that and you do get pregnant, you're likelier to have twins. And that's largely because you have higher levels of the hormone that makes your eggs ripen for fertilization.
And I don't see any trend of those older mothers changing.
I do not think so. And then the other big reason is IVF, in vitro fertilization. I spoke with Dr. Nancy Siegel. She's a professor of psychology at California State University at Fullerton, and she's the author of 4 books on twins, most recently Born Together, Reared Apart, the landmark Minnesota twins study. And she cites a CDC estimate that this increased use of IVF accounts for about 2/3 of the rising twin rate. And meanwhile, IVF is getting better, so the rate of higher multiples like triplets and quadruplets is dropping.
Because physicians are getting much better at successful pregnancies with fewer embryos, rather than implanting 4, 5, or 6 as they did in the past, they're now doing 2 or 1. And this leads to a very high success rate of either singletons or twins, which twins are still high-risk pregnancies, but much, much better than triplets, quads, quints.
So what she means by better is that they're less likely to have many more medical complications.
Okay, so overall, what are the implications of this rising rate of twins?
Well, I think, the obvious implication is that if you're a twin, you're not that unusual anymore. You don't have to feel like as much of a curiosity because you've got a lot of company. And it's also good because there are enough twins to do more research on them. Like you can do more research on whether to separate them or not in school, on their language development, maybe more on supporting parents who are especially strapped when you have 2 babies at once.
Okay, so I have a slightly uncomfortable with the word research and twins because there's a lot of negative connotations there, but the most famous twin research is not about using twins in a good way to answer questions about nature versus nurture.
Exactly right. And, there have been these really fascinating studies. You've probably heard about them when twins are raised apart and then they have stunning similarities when they get back together again. There's one, my favorite story, I think, is about these twins raised apart. And then when they were reunited, they had all these weird quirks that they both had, like storing rubber bands on their wrists or flushing the toilet before using it.
Oh, interesting. We should say identical twins in this case,
yes,
not fraternal twins.
Correct.
Right. Well, Carrie Goldberg is co-host of the Common Health blog and a health science reporter at WBUR. Carrie, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Where your food comes from and what's in it has been a growing topic of conversation in recent years. And in 2015, big food companies, or at least many of them, got the message. NPR's Allison Aubrey joins us to talk about the big push towards transparency and other trends in food for the year. Good morning.
Hi there, Renee.
And the first big change we want to talk about is visible right on the labels of our food. Those labels are changing because the ingredients are changing.
Right. Big food manufacturers are overhauling and, in many cases, simplifying their ingredient lists. We have seen this all year long. Companies such as Kraft and General Mills are both in the midst of big reformulations. For instance, cereals such as Lucky Charms, remember those brightly colored marshmallows? Mm-hmm. Well, instead of using, say, yellow dye number 5, they're transitioning to spice extracts. So things such as turmeric or paprika, to keep those yellow and orange hues, but making them from something a little more natural. And restaurants, such as Subway and Panera, both announced that they're ditching all kinds of ingredients that most of us can't pronounce. The big push here is to make the processed foods and the food at chain restaurants seem a little bit more homemade, a little more artisanal.
And Allison, you also did some reporting on another big issue, and that's waste of food.
That's right.
How big a problem is it?
Well, it's a big issue. It's estimated that about 133 billion pounds of food is wasted each year. And to give you a visual here, imagine enough food being wasted each year to fill a big skyscraper like the Sears Tower, now called the Willis Tower in Chicago, 44 times. And this year, the Pope and well-known chefs such as Dan Barber and even the Obama administration all tried to raise awareness about this. The federal government has set a goal of reducing food waste by 50% by 2030.
And how does all that food get wasted? I mean, how challenging is it to make a big change like that, 50%?
Sure. Well, it's a very distributed problem. I mean, food is lost on farms, then it's lost during processing and transportation. There's also all the unsold food at supermarkets and also what we toss out. Think of that soggy bag of lettuce in the back of your fridge. You know, we've come to expect this dazzling array of sort of eye candy in the produce aisle. Fruits and vegetables that are perfectly shaped and colored. They're blemish-free. Now there are some efforts to sell seconds in the grocery store, sometimes dubbed ugly fruits and vegetables. And these initiatives are good at just raising awareness that, you know, not everything that grows on a farm is perfect.
Well, lastly, in terms of the sorts of issues that cropped up in food during 2015, foodborne illness. The outbreaks linked to Chipotle Mexican Grill have put this issue in the headlines. What's the story there?
Right. Well, unfortunately, if you are a Chipotle shareholder, there's been a lot of focus on the outbreaks linked to Chipotle. Most recently, a norovirus outbreak in Boston that sickened a whole bunch of students at Boston College. But what I should point out is that there are literally thousands of outbreaks, usually smaller clusters, that we don't hear about each year. In fact, the CDC says norovirus is the number one cause of foodborne disease in the U.S. And here's the interesting thing. The vast majority of these outbreaks are caused by infected workers. So hopefully the lesson learned in 2015 is that restaurants need to keep sick workers at home.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Thanks, Renee.
NPR's food and health correspondent, Allison Aubrey. And
The new
let's listen to a discussion about
football season is in full swing, but it's not without
actor Will Smith.
Check it out. Come on.
The question of why people and animals need sleep has bothered scientists for decades, and now researchers think that they've found at least part of the answer. NPR's John Hamilton reports on a study that shows that during sleep, the brain flushes out toxins, including a substance linked to Alzheimer's disease.
From an evolutionary point of view, sleep seems like a bad idea. After all, when you're snoozing, it's easy for another creature to remove you from the gene pool. That's especially true if you're a small rodent, says the University of Rochester's Maiken Nedergaard.
For an animal like a mouse or rat, it's very dangerous to sleep because it's much more vulnerable for cats that will come and eat it.
So sleep must have some really important survival function. To find out what that might be, Nedergaard led a team that studied the brains of sleeping mice. And the scientists noticed that during sleep, something odd was happening to the system that circulates cerebrospinal fluid through the brain and nervous system.
It was pumping fluid into the brain and removing fluid from the brain in a very rapid pace.
Nedergaard says the team realized this was possible in part because when mice went to sleep, their brain cells actually shrank, so it was easier for fluid to circulate. When an animal woke up, she says, the brain cells enlarged again and the flow between cells slowed to a trickle.
It's almost like opening and closing a faucet. It's that dramatic.
Nedergaard and her team had previously shown that the fluid was carrying away waste products that build up in the spaces between cells.
It's like a dishwasher. It's floating by all the cells, which are the dishes, and washing them.
That's important because what's getting washed away during sleep are waste proteins that are toxic to brain cells. Nedergaard says this process could explain why we don't think clearly after a sleepless night, and why a long lack of sleep can actually kill an animal or a person. But why doesn't the brain do this? Energy.
It's probably not possible for the brain to both clean itself and at the same time being aware of the surroundings and talk and move and so on.
And that would explain why animals have evolved to need sleep. Nedergaard says the cleaning process has been observed in rats and baboons, but not yet in humans. Even so, it could offer a new way of understanding human brain diseases, including Alzheimer's. That's because one of the waste products removed from the brain during sleep is beta amyloid, the substance that forms sticky plaques associated with Alzheimer's. Nedergaard says that's probably not a coincidence.
Isn't it interesting that Alzheimer and all other diseases associated with dementia, they are linked to sleep disorders. So the patient would sleep less and less and they would not have deep sleep.
Researchers who study Alzheimer's say Nedergaard's research could help explain a number of recent findings related to sleep. Randall Bateman of Washington University was part of a team that studied how sleep affects levels of that Alzheimer's protein, beta amyloid.
Beta amyloid concentrations continue to increase while a person is awake. And then after people go to sleep, that concentration of beta amyloid decreases. This report provides a beautiful mechanism by which this may be happening.
Bateman says the report also offers a tantalizing hint of a new approach to Alzheimer's prevention.
It does raise the possibility that one might be able to actually control sleep in a way to improve the clearance of beta amyloid and help prevent amyloidosis that we think can lead to Alzheimer's disease.
The new research appears in the journal Science. John Hamilton, NPR News.
A river of refugees flowing.
And we will block this railway.
They are chanting open border.
Military action.
Climate change.
Al-Shabaab.
He brought in a digital clock made from circuit boards.
I Am Kate premieres on E! tonight.
You know, when I was born, gay people couldn't get married.
Linda Franklin came from Detroit to see the Pope.
Oh my goodness.
2015 will be over. Done. In just a few days. And like many of you, we've been taking stock of the year, the things that caught our attention, the things we may have missed. File under that last category, well-written articles that we never got around to reading. Max Linsky is the co-founder of Longform, a site that curates long-form journalism, essays, and fiction, and he's here now to highlight 3 stories from 2015 worth revisiting. Hey there, Max.
Hey, Audie Cornish.
So we're going to start with a piece that you say you basically could not turn away from. International true crime, which is very popular on Longform.
Yes.
Tell us about this story.
It's called The Talented Mr. Cotter. It appeared in Texas Monthly. Audie, do you read Texas Monthly?
I have read it before, but I haven't read it recently.
You need to step up your Texas Monthly game.
Oh, man.
They call it the National Magazine of Texas, and it has this incredible history of true crime yarns. There are some all-time sort of true crime legends who write for the magazine, Pam Koloff, Skip Hollandsworth. But this story, The Talented Mr. Cotter, was written by a young editor at the magazine named Francesca Mari. And it's about a lot of things, but it starts with an attack in Chile. A young woman who had gone there after graduating from the University of Texas is attacked by a housemate, somewhere between a hostel and a group home. She was attacked by her housemate, and all of her friends couldn't process it. It was totally bizarre. It was like this guy who had always been a little weird, a little creepy, did this horrible, horrible thing
And one thing about this roommate we should mention, like, he's very handsome and, like, charming and athletic and...
Ultra-marathoner.
Right. It's a play on the talented Mr. Ripley, that story, right?
It is, yeah. And he is as creepy as the talented Mr. Ripley, except it's real life. And what happens, basically, is this attack happens and they start to realize that he's been doing this and conning people for money for years under a couple of different identities. I don't want to spoil the story, but what's really incredible about it, most true crime pieces that you read, if they've gotten written because someone got caught. And that is not how this one ends.
Yikes. Okay, the second story you brought is from an Australian publication, The Monthly, and it is like completely different from the true crime thing. It's an essay by a woman named Helen Garner called The Insults of Age. It's very funny. Give us a sense of kind of how this plays out.
Helen Garner. Helen Garner is the best, and The Monthly is also a fantastic publication. It's totally in Australia that does all kinds of great work. This essay is about Helen Garner deciding that she is fed up with not saying anything when people say stupid things to her about being old. It's going to resonate with anyone who's, say, over the age of 65, but I actually think it's just going to resonate with anybody. Because what she does is basically the thing that we all wish we could do, which is when someone says something dumb and insulting to us, she doesn't stand for it. And the essay sort of takes you through her snapping, and then you expect her to sort of have some remorse. She's kind of like biting people's heads off and telling them exactly what she thinks, but she has no remorse.
And we should say it's not just insult, it's like condescension, like people speaking slowly to her, kind of like, ma'am, are you okay? Like,
do you know what airline you're flying?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Meanwhile, she's like a tremendously accomplished writer in full control.
And that's in The Monthly from Australia. I do suggest people check it out. It was very funny. Your last reading recommendation is a bit of a turn from like the kinds of a few thousand word story, right, that you might see on long form. This is kind of a multimedia project.
I'm not even sure this counts as long form, but I don't care. It's so good that we're including it on the list. It was on a site called Eater, which had a tremendous year. And the thing that I love about Eater, I don't know if you read a lot of food writing, Audie, but it has a tendency to be a little precious.
Right, right.
Just a little precious.
Yeah, the term foodie now seems a little insulting sometimes.
Yeah, and those foodies, I encourage them, like Helen Garner, to stand up. But this story is really as much a business story as it is a food story. It's called One Night in Kachka. And it's about a restaurant in Portland, one of the best restaurants in America. And the folks at Kachka completely opened their doors to this whole team from Eater. They had like 3 reporters and 2 videographers and a photographer. And they basically documented from the very beginning of the night to the end what happens in a great restaurant. They looked at the kitchen. They interviewed guests. It's a fantastic look at all aspects of running a restaurant.
And we have a little clip of it, just to give people a sample.
It is a chef's selection, so it is pulled directly from the left side of your menu. It winds up being 11 dishes with pickles.
11 dishes with pickles, and that is a traditional Russian appetizer. I repeat, appetizer.
Sounds delicious. The other thing that's amazing about this story that I really appreciated is you always hear kind of like the restaurant business is a terrible business, but Kachka was completely transparent about their finances, and it turns out that even at like one of America's best restaurants, the margins are so thin. Like there's so much work that goes into running this restaurant, and at the end of the day, they really don't make very much.
You know, each year there's always like a big think piece, right, that everyone sort of goes back and forth about on the internet. Did you have something like that this year that you loved?
Well, the story, we just put out our best of the year list, and the story that was in the number 1 slot for that was called The Really Big One. There's a piece in The New Yorker by Catherine Schultz about, I don't know if you've heard this, Audie, but at any minute there may be an earthquake so massive that the entire west coast of America falls off a shelf. Have you heard that?
In movie trailers, but this is...
Turns out that's totally true. It can happen anytime, and I'm not sure there was much controversy about that story, other than just people reading it and going, how are we not talking about this all the time?
I was looking through one of your best of lists, and I noticed in the list for essays in particular had a lot of women writers.
Top 10 too.
Yeah, exactly. And it sort of surprised me because a lot of times these best of think piece ranking things, you don't really see diversity of writers. yours. What's going on at Longform that's different?
Well, I don't think anything is going on differently. I will say that we're very conscious of that, and we make an effort to make the site every day diverse, and certainly to make this list diverse. I'll also say, it's not hard. There were many, many, many fantastic articles written by women this year, and there were tons more that we could have added.
That's Max Linsky. He's co-founder of Longform and host of the podcast of the same name. He was talking to us about 3 articles from 2015 that are worth revisiting. If you want to read more from this year, Longform's Best of list is now going up. Give it a look, pick a story, start reading. Max, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Here's one thing that will not.
It's time.
We're tracking an effort in this country to prevent the next mass shooting. It's a much-debated law that takes effect in the new year here in California. Capitol Public Radio's Ben Adler.
Santa Barbara, California, May 2014. A young man killed 6 people and injured 13 after his parents had warned law enforcement he could be dangerous.
All members vote who desire to vote.
Within months, California lawmakers took this vote.
Votes, ayes 47, noes 25. The measure passes.
And the bill was soon signed into law. Modeled on domestic violence restraining order laws, the measure allows family members or law enforcement to seek a temporary gun violence restraining order against someone they believe could be dangerous.
It establishes a process to obtain a legal court order to temporarily reduce those potential acts when we have the warning signs or indications that the person might be at risk for violence.
Rudy Escalante is the police chief of Capitola, California, and is active in the state's Police Chiefs Association. Even though there's no evidence the San Bernardino shooter's family raised concerns about them, the law is now getting more attention.
If those circumstances existed in the San Bernardino case, then it is possible, if the law was operative, that they could have reported that and been able to go through a civil process of getting a restraining order and had those guns removed.
Though Escalante quickly added,
a lot of ifs there.
President Obama has called on Americans to speak up if they believe people in their family or community could be dangerous. And Democratic State Assemblyman Phil Ting wants to expand California's law to include coworkers and perhaps other groups.
You have a number of innocent victims who were co-workers of this individual who hopefully, if they had the tools to protect themselves, they would have been able to.
We have a great concern about expanding that model because it opens it up to any sort of a frivolous attack on an individual.
Sam Paredes of Gun Owners of California opposed the original law as unconstitutional. He's even more worried about expanding it.
There's going to have to be some very close scrutiny to see if it's being taken advantage of by people with a gripe or a concern or a grudge. It will always be suspect whenever used.
Gun control advocacy groups say Connecticut and Indiana have similar laws, though only law enforcement and not family members can seek gun violence restraining orders. Several other states, including New York and Washington, are considering their own legislation. For NPR News, I'm Ben Adler in Sacramento.
WNYC New York Public Radio is right here.
This is NPR One.
One.
Let's assess just how much territory has been taken back from ISIS. U.S. and Iraqi forces have celebrated advances this week. They say they've cleared out much of the Iraqi city of Ramadi.
Here's a different type of police problem: being able to figure out when someone is driving while stoned. There's pressure to find a reliable way to do that in the areas of the U.S. that have legalized recreational marijuana. Washington State is one of them. And a lab at Washington State University is working to develop a roadside marijuana breathalyzer. Reporter Tom Bonsi of the Northwest News Network paid a visit.
Let's suppose for just a second that you smoked a couple joints at a party and then got behind the wheel. This could be you.
I'm Lieutenant Sharp of the State Patrol. The reason I stopped you today is I noticed you weren't able to stay in your lane. Any reason for that?
That's Washington State Patrol Lieutenant Rob Sharp. He says driving behavior, coordination, odors, mannerisms, and physical cues are some of the factors he uses to establish impairment by drugs.
Okay, sir, what I need you to do right now is turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for DUI.
If this were real, the arresting officer might take you in for an hour-long evaluation by a drug recognition expert. He could seek a warrant to have your blood drawn at a hospital. The blood work typically takes weeks to come back. Washington State University chemistry professor Herb Hill heard about the challenges of nabbing drug-impaired drivers during a chance encounter with a colleague at a reception.
And I said, well, why don't we have a breathalyzer for that? And then he says, well, there's none exists. And I said, well, I think we can probably make one.
And ta-da! Well, actually, it's taken years, but the goal is in sight. Hill takes me to his lab, where he and colleagues are developing a handheld device that police officers can use to detect THC. THC is the main psychoactive compound in marijuana.
This is the new prototype here.
So this is version 2.0?
This is 2.0.
Hill says preliminary field testing with 30 human subjects this spring established that the device can detect THC in breath. Much more testing is ahead to look at potential variations among gender, race, body types, and chronic users. Some marijuana activists fear this technology could lead to unimpaired drivers getting unfairly arrested. They point out that THC persists in the body long after the high has worn off. Hill's team recruits volunteers who buy their own weed and smoke it at their homes and then blow into the prototype.
We had to go through the human testing, the institutional board review, and it took us almost a year to get permission to do this.
How hard was it to find these volunteers?
It wasn't very hard to find the volunteers. We have a waiting list of volunteers.
The human guinea pigs get paid just over minimum wage to smoke their pot. Hill says the portable device he's developing may look like an alcohol breathalyzer, but works differently inside. His team is modifying existing explosive detectors and chemical warfare sensors.
In the beginning, at least, this would not be used as evidential information. It would be used as screening information.
The Washington State Patrol's Lieutenant Sharp says he's excited by the prospect of new tools to help him do his job better, but he says the pot breathalyzer must prove itself highly accurate before he'd adopt it.
Even if it's a preliminary device, we still need that level of accuracy and reliability for the trust and confidence. We're talking about people's rights, their liberties and freedoms.
All of which points to it being several years at the earliest before you'd see a roadside breath test to identify stoned drivers. A few states have set legal limits for THC, but most have not. For NPR News, I'm Tom Bonsi in Olympia, Washington.
All right, this next story begins with a simple question. Should women have to register for the draft? Turns out the answer is anything but simple. The Supreme Court seemed to settle things decades ago. The basis for that ruling is gone after the Pentagon opened all military positions to women. Here's NPR's David Welna.
During the last year of his presidency, Jimmy Carter resurrected a legal obligation that had lapsed. All males ages 18 through 25 would once again have to register with the Selective Service. Carter wanted women as well as men to have to sign up, but Congress limited that registration to males only. In early 1981, the matter ended up before the Supreme Court, as NPR's Nina Totenberg reported at the time.
The issue is the all-male draft registration system unconstitutional sex discrimination.
If I have to register for the draft, then my wife should also.
One of those bringing that constitutional challenge was a young Californian named Robert Goldberg. He was asked by a reporter if he wanted his wife to serve in combat.
One thing is whether or not I want her to. Another thing is whether it's equitable for me to serve in combat and for her to be excluded merely on the basis of sex.
The Supreme Court overruled a lower court and upheld the male-only registration requirement. It did so arguing that because women were barred from combat positions in the military, they would not have the same chances for promotions as men. It was therefore not unconstitutional for Congress to distinguish between them. But as of this month, all women are eligible for combat. With that, Congress seems to have lost its court-endorsed rationale for limiting Selective Service registration to males only.
We'll review the whole policy and whether Selective Service should apply to women or not.
That's John McCain, the Republican chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He plans to hold hearings next month on the question of women signing up for a possible draft.
I think it's paradoxical that they wouldn't be required to sign up if they're eligible to serve in every area of the military.
Other lawmakers oppose making any changes. Mississippi Republican Roger Wicker, who's also on the Senate Armed Services panel, says Defense Secretary Ash Carter's decision to make every position in the military open to women was the wrong call.
Because if you listen to the generals, they would recommend against women in combat.
I think it's a very important issue that we actually begin to debate.
That's New York Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. She too sits on the Armed Services Committee. And she thinks an equal opportunity for women to hold military jobs may mean there's an equal obligation for signing up with the Selective Service.
It doesn't mean we're going to ask all women to serve in combat. It means we may ask all women to serve in some public service capacity where they can help the national need at a time of crisis. I think that is a very legitimate conversation.
Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst agrees. Ernst served in the Iowa National Guard and Army Reserves for more than 20 years and did combat duty in Iraq. The time has come, she says, to talk about women signing up for a possible draft.
I'm not pushing for that, but I think now that we are able to perform all types of occupations within the military, we need to have that discussion. So I look forward to it. I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
David Welna, NPR News, Washington.
Hey, Sindhu.
Hey.
So we're here, finally. I'm on the Upper East Side of Manhattan with Sindhu, our intern here at Planet Money, and I'm about to set off on a kind of quest.
We're here. How do you feel?
I feel like I'm gonna throw up, actually.
Okay, well, don't throw up in the store, Stacy. I feel like that's a bad tactic.
Like all epic heroes, I have a plan. I've been going over what I'm gonna say. I think I'm ready.
What are you gonna say?
Okay, I'm gonna say, hey, do you have any Birkin bags? The Birkin bag. It's a purse made by Hermès, the French luxury brand, and Birkins average around $60,000. You can get a starter Birkin for around $10,000. There are luxury goods, and then there is the Birkin bag. For 30 years, the Birkin has been the it bag for rich and powerful women. Elizabeth Taylor carried one, Kate Middleton, Kim Kardashian has one. Victoria Beckham apparently has like 100 of them. This is the bag that proves you've made it, that you are on the top. There are people with Birkin bags, and there are the rest of us. And apparently, even just getting to see one is kind of a big deal. They won't just show them to anyone. And this is why I'm so nervous. I am about to walk into an Hermès store, walk up to a salesperson, and ask to see a Birkin bag, which is like my own personal nightmare. I find those stores really intimidating.
Okay, you got this. Good luck.
I'll see you soon.
Bye. Oh my God, I feel so bad for her. 14 minutes later, Stacy finally emerged from the store. Or there she is, just walking really fast. Hey, you're back! How'd it go?
Hi, Sindhu. Okay,
okay. Breathe, it's okay.
Okay, it's over. Yeah, so they didn't have any Birkins.
Surprise, surprise.
This is the strange thing about Birkin bags. They always seem to be mysteriously out of stock. And this is no accident. Give it to me. Hello and welcome to Planet Money. I'm Stacey Vanek Smith.
And I'm Sindhu Gnanasambandam. Today on the show, the elaborate strategy that has kept the Birkin bag the luxury it bag for decades.
We go on a quest to see one of these bags and find ourselves in a world where the normal rules of commerce are totally upside down. Also, how you get someone to pay $60,000 for something that is, let's be honest, just a purse.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Credit Karma. A credit score can impact important things in life, from car and student loans to mortgage and interest payments. Credit Karma gives you completely free credit reports and scores with no hidden costs or obligations. More than 45 million Americans have used Credit Karma to check their scores. Get your free credit report today by visiting creditkarma.com/NPR.
Wednesday Martin, Wednesday's her first name, can remember the exact moment she started wanting a Birkin bag. It was right after she moved to the Upper East Side. It's one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in New York. And she was walking down the sidewalk, and she saw this very well-dressed woman walking towards her.
And we were the only people on the sidewalk. And as she walked toward me, rather than keeping to the right, she was slowly but surely walking sort of at me so that I had to move further and further to the right. And I was ceding more and more sidewalk territory to her until finally I found myself stopping right up against this garbage can that she had sort of walked me into. And she brushed right by me with her handbag. That was a dominance display, and that woman used her handbag to do it.
She's pretty sure it was a Birkin bag. They're a very simple, boxy handbag, kind of on the larger side, and they have a padlock on the clasp.
And when this happened, Wednesday did not think, oh my gosh, women in this neighborhood are crazy, I need to move. She thought, I need one of those bags.
That was the moment when I realized that handbags are really important in New York. And if I want to play ball on the Upper East Side, I better stop walking around with this white plastic bag with a couple of bananas in it. I better saddle up.
Back in 1981, the CEO of Hermès was on a plane with the French actress Jane Birkin, and Jane complained she needed a weekend bag.
The Birkin bag was born.
Wanting to buy a Birkin bag? That's the easy part. Even having the money isn't the really hard part. Finding one to buy, that is tricky, even for professionals. Michael Tonello ran into this. He had a business buying and selling luxury goods. And one day, one of his customers came in and said, hey, can you get me one of those Birkin bags?
I started asking for Birkin bags, but they quickly told me that they didn't have them. And I couldn't figure out why it was that Hermès didn't have any Birkin bags if it was, a bag that Hermès made and sold.
Michael started talking to other people who were trying to buy Birkins, and they were all being told the same thing. We are sold out, but we can put you on a waiting list.
Anywhere from 2 years to 4 years waiting list. At one point they were saying that there was a waiting list to get on the waiting list, and it just all seemed kind of crazy to me.
If you got a bag that people are willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars for, why won't you sell it to them?
Hermès has an explanation. It says these bags take a really long time to make. They just can't keep up with demand. First of all, some of them are made out of these very exotic leathers like crocodile and ostrich, and Birkin bags are hand-sewn by select artisans in the south of France. Hermès says that is why they are always sold out. I ran this by Josh Weltman. He's worked in advertising for years. He was one of the producers of the show Mad Men. They're like, listen, these are totally handmade. It takes 12 hours to make one. People have to apprentice for years in order to get to the level where they can make a Birkin bag. Like, this product is special.
No. I'm sorry, it's not.
Josh says that if Hermès wanted to make more bags, they totally could. They've had 30 years to train those select artisans. He says the reason for the extreme scarcity of the Birkin bag has nothing to do with how it's made. It's part of the marketing.
Josh says the whole idea of a luxury good is something that not everyone has. And there are a couple of ways you can make sure that not everyone has your product. You can jack up the price. A lot of companies do this. Fancy watch companies, luxury car companies, of course, the Birkin bag. But Hermès has gone a step further. They don't just charge a lot for the Birkin bag. They make sure that not everybody can get one. They have made Birkin bags really hard to buy. You have to go through all these weird rituals to get your hands on one.
But Wednesday Martin, our Upper East Sider, was determined to join the Birkin Club. So she consulted an expert.
I conducted myself according to tribal code, and I went to a wise tribal elder, although she didn't look like an elder. She looked very young for her age.
It was her friend's mom who owned a Birkin. Actually, she owned several Birkins. And her friend's mom called a salesperson she knew at Hermès and, quote, effected an introduction. She told Wednesday to send her husband to the Hermès store to introduce himself to the salesperson. Apparently, Wednesday would have a better shot at a Birkin if her husband said he wanted to buy it for her as a gift.
He had to show up in person and meet this lovely saleswoman who said, I hope you'll understand that we'll have to wait.
Even Wednesday, from the right neighborhood, everything right, she couldn't do that.
And this goes beyond scarcity. Where most stores try to make you feel welcome, try to make you feel special, Hermes' strategy seems to be to reject and humiliate. Josh Weltman, the advertiser, says that is intentional.
They play hard to get. That's how they seduce you.
It almost sounds like they're kind of like humiliating.
They haze you. It's a hazing process.
Hazing doesn't create resentment?
No, it creates a bond once you're in. It makes you feel that you're worthy. It gives you identity.
I mean, think about this. Hermes has created a $60,000 purse. And instead of convincing you why on earth you should pay that crazy amount for a Birkin bag, Hermes has people trying to convince them to let them buy one. Please let me spend $60,000 at your store.
And this may just sound like this insane marketing tactic used on insane people who have way too much money, but Josh says that you can actually find this tactic everywhere.
The basic example is nightclubs, like when they have that big line out front. And Josh says elite colleges do the same thing.
The thing that they publish about Harvard and Stanford and all the Ivy Leagues is the ratio of how many people they let in compared to the amount of people that they reject. It's not a high-status school unless it's super selective.
Everyone wants to be part of a club that's just out of reach.
That's the soft part that we're poking at in advertising,
It feels a little sinister that they're marketing right to our soft spot. It's like we're helpless.
Well, they didn't put the soft spot there. You're the one that has the itch,
But
they're just letting you scratch it, right? I mean, that's a service.
Wow, you're good at your job. There is, of course, a very obvious cost to this strategy of turning people away, to poking at that soft spot. For Hermes, it means that every time someone walks into a store and asks to buy a Birkin bag and they say no, that is a $60,000 sale they are not making.
They don't get greedy. I guess that's what it's sort of a weird thing to say about a company that's charging $70,000 for a bag.
And not getting greedy pays off. Josh says the reason that the Birkin has been on the top of the handbag food chain for 30 years is exactly because it's so hard to get. It keeps people wanting one. Of course, to make money, Hermes does eventually have to sell a bag to someone.
Wednesday Martin did actually finally get one. In this totally random way. Her husband was on this business trip in Japan, and he saw an Hermes store. So he went in and asked, "Do you have a Birkin bag?" They said, "No, sorry, we're out." He said, "I need one." They said, "No, we're out." And he said, "No, I need one."
And Japan is an extremely polite culture. I think that after they told him a few times that they couldn't do that, and he insisted a few times that, in fact, they could and he wanted them to, they must have just thought, this man is so rude and this is so awkward. The best way to get him out of here might be to just let him buy one of these. So they produced a bag.
And remember our luxury buyer, Michael Tonello? He also ended up getting a Birkin bag in a totally different way. He was in an Hermes store buying a bunch of scarves for a customer.
And I piled up about 10 or 15 Hermes scarves. And as we were walking to the register to pay, just sort of nonchalantly, I said to the salesperson, "Oh, do you happen to have a Birkin bag?" And the salesperson said, "Oh, I don't know. Let me look in the back."
What did you think?
I thought, she's going to go in the back room and come out and tell me they don't have any Birkin bags.
Instead, she came out with a big orange box, a Birkin bag, and she let him buy it for $20,000.
So then Michael goes across town to another Hermes store and tries the same thing. It totally works.
Michael had accidentally cracked the code, buying a bunch of really expensive stuff at their Hermes store first, then casually ask for a bag, and you'll get one.
I suddenly realized that it was a lot like chemistry class. The order in which you put the chemicals into the beaker are very, very important.
Somehow, Michael had turned the Hermes shopping experience back into a normal commerce situation. I have a pet theory about this. I think that after he bought all those thousands of dollars worth of scarves, the salespeople at Hermes felt grateful to him. They felt like they owed him, and they wanted to be nice to him, like in a normal store. And that is the moment when Michael asked for the Birkin bag. He caught them at a weak moment.
But Stacy and I, we still hadn't seen a Birkin though. So when we met Wednesday, we asked if we could see hers.
Do you mind it? Can we see your bag? So I've actually never seen one. I mean, I'm sure I've seen them around. And this felt kind of momentous. That is the genius of Hermes. Even just seeing a Birkin bag feels like a big deal. It's very like clean lines, very simple, very plain, really.
It's very plain and simple and understated.
I mean, if I just saw this on the street and I didn't know what a special bag it was, I wouldn't look at it twice.
You might just say, who cares? That's not such a great looking bag.
Okay, so here's the truth. That bag is so underwhelming. It is aggressively underwhelming. It's ugly and boxy, and the leather doesn't even seem that nice. But as I was looking at it, I caught myself trying to see how special it was. I kept thinking, people pay $60,000 for this bag. This is a special bag. If I can't see that, I have the problem. Can I touch it?
Yeah, touch it.
I feel like it's almost like a religious. I feel like there really is some weird aura about it. This is really embarrassing to listen to right now. Religious relic, aura. That's what happened to me. I was reporting a story about bags, but it's hard not to get sucked in, even when you know all the mechanisms behind what's going on. And Wednesday Martin said she knew how I felt. Did you ever feel like a little suckered by Hermes going through all of this?
Are you kidding? Of course. Only every single second that I was doing it, I thought I had lost it. I felt ridiculous about it all the time, and I still do. I still hope to come out of this interview sounding like a person with a sense of humor rather than a zombie. But in a sense, I did become a zombie.
Still, Wednesday says, having a Birkin bag really did help her feel more at home on the Upper East Side. She never got pushed off a sidewalk again. People who didn't have Birkins approached her to ask her how she'd gotten it, to ask if they could hold it. People who did have Birkins wanted to exchange war stories. She said the bag helped her feel like she had a place in this new neighborhood. For Sindhu and I, our quest was done. We had seen a real-life Birkin bag, we had touched it, and we decided to celebrate, we would retreat to our own world of luxury. In this part of town, we can probably only afford a coffee. Do you want to go get a coffee?
Let's get some $6 coffee. It really does taste better.
We always love to hear what you think of the show. Shoot us an email, planetmoney@npr.org, or you can tweet us @planetmoney. You can tell us what your own personal Birkin quest is for. Also, if you are hunting for a new podcast to try out this holiday season, check out npr.org/podcasts. They have a whole bunch of podcasts on pretty much any topic you can imagine. It's the perfect way to escape your family for the holidays. Find your new favorite podcast at npr.org/podcasts or on the NPR One app.
We'd like to thank Tomai Serdari, Yuri Turetsky, and Dana Thomas for helping us on today's show. Thank you guys.
Today's show was produced by the incredibly patient Alex Goldmark. And Sindhu, we are also saying goodbye to you this show.
I'm so sad.
I know, you're going back to the excellent University of Chicago to finish your degree. It's a worthy cause, but we're going to miss you a lot.
I heard that's important. I'll miss you guys too.
I'm Stacey Vanek Smith.
And I'm Sindhu Gnanasambandhan. Can I say my name again? Okay. And I'm Sindhu Gnanasambandhan. Thanks for listening.
They're called restaurants. Casual dining chains like Hooters, Twin Peaks, and Tilted Kilt Pub. These dining spots do really well in Texas. And this year, a new restaurant opened in Dallas, but instead of female waitresses wearing miniskirts, this place features male waiters in bikini shorts. KERA's Lauren Silverman went to check out the place called Tallywhackers.
Let's start with the name, Tallywhackers.
I've always used the word Tallywhackers as a place that I wanted to call it, and it's a Southern term. You know, my grandfather used the word.
Rodney Duke is owner and creator of Tallywhackers. From the wood table where we sat, the place almost looks like your average sports bar. Football on the big screens, girls in heels at the bar picking at fries. Then you see the buff, shirtless men in skin-tight short shorts carrying trays of hot dogs.
My goal here was to create a place that if you wanted to come and have a great time and have hot food and hotter servers, that we could offer it to you.
Duke had been thinking about opening this Chesterant for more than a decade. He wanted to attract both women and gay men. When it finally opened in May, the line was out the door. And there were families, too.
We're a family restaurant. There's not anything inappropriate going on here.
Happy birthday to you from Tallywhackers!
Maria Munoz was celebrating her 22nd birthday with family from Fort Worth. While the waiters sang, danced, and flexed their muscles for photos, her friend Isabel Hinojosa bottle-fed her baby girl. Hinojosa says Hooters is fine, but
it's about time they made one for women, a place for women to go to.
I think it's a great business idea. It doesn't appeal to me aesthetically, frankly, but that's just me.
Paul Friedman is a history professor at Yale. Yes, the medieval food expert has a place in this story. He's written about some of the first restaurants to cater specifically to women. Back in the 1850s, they were called ice cream saloons.
And these places did ban alcohol. They served light food, light entrees, sweet desserts, elaborate ice cream desserts. And this is what you find still today, the notion that women want to have are sort of finicky when it comes to salads, or they want tofu.
A big difference from the wings and burgers on the menu at most restaurants. At Tallywhackers, salad is on the menu. So are more hearty options. Chicken fried chicken, shrimp and grits, the S&M burger, that's for Swiss and mushroom, of course, and lots of 1-pound hot dogs.
The food actually is really, really good.
Anthony Richardson is sitting with his friend Julia Drew on a black leather couch in the lounge area. Richardson is gay and Drew is straight. They both are enjoying the eye candy.
It's sort of a male version of Hooters. I don't know, but I like it.
Texas is home to a handful of casual dining spots with women in skimpy outfits. Redneck Heaven, Bone Daddies, Twin Peaks, and yes, Hooters does its best business in the Lone Star State. Still, owner Rodney Duke was a bit concerned about turning the tables with Tallywhackers.
I mean, we are in a very conservative state, and I was a little fearful when we first opened this up, to make sure that we were doing it in the right place. But Dallas is my home. I felt comfortable here. I wanted to do it here in Dallas.
Duke seems confident Tallywhackers will catch on. He says they've already gotten inquiries about franchising from Asia, Europe, and Canada. For now, at least in Dallas, the restaurant is uniting people, men and women, gay and straight, over a common love for hot dogs. For NPR News, I'm Lauren Silverman in Dallas.
Every year, Google looks back at our online queries and compiles a list of the top searches. And for 2015, the top rank goes to former NBA player and reality TV star Lamar Odom. Caitlyn Jenner was also right up there at the top, along with the Paris terrorist attacks, Jurassic Park, and that blue or gold dress, whatever it was. Joining us now is Simon Rogers. He's the data editor at Google News Lab, which put together all of this information. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So right off the bat, how would you characterize the big trends in search this year? Are there trends?
It's been a really interesting year because normally you might expect that the big searches are going to be the kind of things that the kind of fluffier end of the news cycle, things that are entertainment or sports or whatever. But actually what we've seen are kind of real hard news stories coming top in a lot of the kind of categories that we've been looking at this year. Things like the Paris attacks. There were nearly 1 billion searches around the Paris attacks in the days around those events. And those huge news stories like the refugee crisis and even the Chinese stock market kind of crashing, all those stories have really generated a lot of kind of search interest over the year, as well as Jurassic World or Caitlyn Jenner or Lamar Odom.
If you dig into the specifics of one event like the Paris attacks, is there anything you can figure out about how a search history informs how news travels from place to place or person to person?
The first attacks were around 18 minutes past 9 Paris time. And within a few moments of that, as news started spreading on social media, people started searching for it as well. And you could really see within minutes, people were searching Berlin, London, even in New York, within about 10 minutes of those events happening, people were starting to search in New York. So it's a fascinating glimpse before there's a proper news report out there, before people really know what's going on. They're desperate to find out that information.
And so it's just speculative. It's just people worrying about where they live, but still.
Well, worrying and trying to find out more about it. I mean, there's a kind of honesty to the way we search, because you're not publicly stating something. You're saying, I want to find out more about this. And that can cover anything from trying to find out how tall the political candidate is. And if you look at the searches around political candidates this year, it's amazing how many of them are for how tall one candidate is compared to another. But there's also around serious events like this, where something happens in the world and your first instinct is then to take to Google to find out more about it.
Is it inappropriate to draw bigger conclusions about our humanity, who we are, what we value from these lists?
For me, the results of this analysis were kind of reassuring in a way. I like Star Wars. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I haven't yet, so please no spoilers. But the fact there are more searches for the Paris attacks is reassuring to me. We really care about things that matter. And that shows, but we also care about, we've got a great eclectic mix of other things that are all part of our lives as well. I think there's something really interesting about the way we search, and it's not, and we're just starting to kind of grasp what that might be. So we've done analysis around election results, where we've looked at the way people search before elections, and there does appear to be a correlation between search and the way people then go out and vote. But we don't know for sure this stuff yet, and we're just starting to get a sense of it.
Simon Rogers, he's the data editor at Google News Lab. Thanks so much for talking with us, Simon.
Thanks for having me.
And this past spring, Allegheny County Council rejected a proposal that would have assigned letter grades to restaurants following health inspections. In this episode of On the House, Larkin Page Jacobs reports on the rise and fall of the restaurant grade proposal.
Eat out at almost any of the 4,200 restaurants in the county, and you'll see a green Allegheny County Health Department sticker on the window or door indicating that it's past inspection.
My general perception of a green sticker was that that restaurant was safe to eat at.
That's public source reporter Eric Holmberg, who's been investigating the restaurant inspection system. He says that initial impression wasn't quite accurate.
What we found is that that's not the case. That the green sticker really isn't an indicator of safety at all, and there's a wide range of restaurants who have a green sticker, from the very good to the very bad.
The restaurant grading system proposed by the health department was meant to make those differences clearer by breaking up the green sticker into A's, B's, and C's based on points. The points are deducted depending on the type and number of violations. 90 and above is an A, 80 to 90 is a B, etc. Those points can be found in the restaurant inspection reports. Holmberg analyzed about 5,000 of them collected between July 2014 and April 2015.
We saw somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of the restaurants would have scored below an A. And there were a number of restaurants that would have qualified for some type of enforcement action by the county health department that maintained their green sticker the entire time.
Over the 10-month time period, Holmberg says there were 11 consumer alerts and 11 restaurant closures. But that number was a lot less than the 57 Holmberg found that qualified for an enforcement action, which could include issuing consumer alerts or shutting them down. That means the county is failing to act on dozens of restaurants with potentially dangerous conditions, such as meat left out at unsafe temperatures or having a sick worker in the kitchen. And patrons are still seeing a green sticker. But John Graff, owner of the Priory Hotel on the North Side and vice chair of the Western chapter of the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association, says the green, yellow, and red color system is the best one. He says showing more detail could present an inaccurate picture of a restaurant.
That letter grade is a result of an inspection. It may take an hour, it may take 2 hours, once a year.
About 20 men and women are responsible for inspecting not only all the restaurants in the county, but also school cafeterias, church kitchens, and grocery stores.
So if somebody comes in and inspects that kitchen in January, that hour snapshot, how accurate is that as to the state of that kitchen as of August? It's not. I mean, it's old information.
He also says there's a lack of consistency among inspectors. Holmberg, the journalist, points out there's no way to completely mitigate the human factor.
The inspectors aren't robots. They're not consistent 100% of the time. And that's really not something that you can fix or change.
Allegheny County Health Department Director Karen Hacker says they've been working on addressing that issue through professional development and rigorous training, but indicated that the entire system needs to be evaluated.
There are a number of restaurants, although limited, who continue to have critical violations. And in order to stop that, we do feel that there ought to be other strategies that we could be using.
Still, she says despite problems with the color system, the grading system didn't get the votes because no one advocated for it. The restaurant lobby turned out to speak against it.
Often when you're trying to pass regulations that may not be popular or that may be at least not popular with some segments, it is that crisis that pushes things forward, and there was no perceived crisis.
Though the grading system didn't pass, Hacker says a lot of good came out of the issue, including heightened public awareness. She says strong and competent leadership should increase quality of inspections, and they're looking for other ways to inform the public, such as putting QR codes or barcodes readable by smartphones on restaurants so consumers can access the full inspection report. Meanwhile, customers wanting to clarify the gray area in the color system can find the data on individual restaurants on the Health Department's website. I'm Larkin Page Jacobs, 90.5 WESA.
Every workplace has them, maybe even NASA. The coworker who steals pens and pencils, the bully everyone avoids, the big shot who brags about golfing with the boss. Harvard Business School researcher Dylan Miner calls this kind of person the toxic worker. He's written a new paper on the impact of these people on the workplace, and he joins us now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You looked at employment data from more than 50,000 workers across 11 companies. What did you find that toxic workers all have in common?
I found several things. So it's not that literally every toxic worker is the same, but there certainly are some common traits. One thing I found is on average they tend to be much more productive. I also found that toxic workers tend to be more selfish than the average worker, tend to be more overconfident. And lastly, and I think interestingly, surprisingly to me, they also self-profess to follow the rules.
So some of those things don't seem to fit with the others. More productive than average, for example. You found that toxic workers are harmful to the workplace. How do you reconcile that with the idea that they're more productive than the average worker?
Well, there presents itself a trade-off. So one area in particular is overconfidence. It turns out that those workers that are overconfident do indeed tend to be quite a bit more productive. However, those workers that are overconfident also are more likely to be toxic. And so, fortunately, in this setting, we actually had the data that we could look at the effects of profits. And if you look at those two features together, that is increased likelihood of productivity and increased likelihood of toxicity, you're actually still taking on a net $1,000 loss per worker that has greater confidence.
A net $1,000 loss per worker. So you're actually able to quantify how bad for business a toxic worker is.
Correct. And in the most extreme version, I did a comparison of a toxic worker, the average toxic worker, to a superstar. We do a lot of work, both in practice and in academia, looking for the next superstar, how to find them, how to motivate them.
The superstar.
The superstar, exactly. So in this particular paper, I define a superstar simply as the person that's in the top 1% of all productivity. And I find that individual, on average, saves the firm or increases profit about $5,000 per annum. The way we think about that is what a superstar is doing is producing more things than the average worker. And so we can essentially look at how much they're saving us in wages. We have to pay them a bit more, but there still are some savings because they're so productive. So we can compare that to the toxic worker. And one area they have good measures, these companies I studied, is the cost of turnover. And so a toxic worker, as it turns out, as they enter a team, the turnover goes up. And so we can measure what is that increased cost. And so that increased cost of turnover tends to be about $12,000 for a toxic worker.
Well, Dylan Miner, what advice do you have for employees or for bosses who are in the workplace with these toxic workers?
So several things. Just stepping back one step, of course, the ideal is to avoid them all together. But once they're currently there, it's very important to look at workers in more of a multidimensional basis. I find that many managers are focused on the productivity end, and just like that example of overconfidence, if you just choose on overconfidence when you look at productivity, you would hire that person. But if you look at both dimensions, you're also worried about potential toxicity, and you want to hire someone that's a greater corporate citizen, then in that case, you probably wouldn't hire the more confident worker.
That's Dylan Miner, a researcher at Harvard Business School on the subject of the toxic worker. Great talking to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Just a little note, today's podcast includes some bad words. Actually, it's the same bad word said over again in rapid succession. There you go. You've been warned. All right, Jacob, here's the photo. This is a surveillance photo. We're pretty sure taken by the FBI. You want to describe it?
Yeah, so it's two men in a parking lot. It looks like the picture was taken from across the street. You see the men in profile. The man on the right is wearing sunglasses and a dark jacket, and he's handing an envelope to the man on the left.
What I love about this photo is it captures the exact moment where the guy on the left is actually taking the envelope.
Yeah, you can see the thumb just closing right over it.
We can tell you what's in that envelope because this whole thing ended up in court. It is stuffed with money. The envelope's filled with $100 bills.
And this is a picture of insider trading. You hear about insider trading in the news. It's this abstract thing. No, here is a photo of it happening.
Insider trading, where one person tips a friend off about some merger or leaks some confidential information. They buy some stock and they make a ton of money. This one made for a particularly good story.
In many senses, it's a story made for the movies. An accountant for KPMG, Scott London, who now has insider trading charges brought against him.
Insider trading feels like cheating because it is cheating. And it strikes this nerve for people who feel like the markets are rigged. You know, here is your proof, right? Two men in a Starbucks parking lot exchanging an envelope filled with cash. Hello and welcome to Planet Money. I'm David Kestenbaum.
And I'm Jacob Goldstein. Today on the show, we talk to that man in the photo taking the envelope full of cash in the Starbucks parking lot. And he tells us everything. He tells us what he did, how he did it, and why he did it. Well, all right, on the why, he's still kind of trying to figure it out.
Also, what is insider trading? The law is not what I thought. Actually, there isn't really a law. And we dig into this brain teaser. The money that insider traders make, where exactly does that come from? Who are they stealing from?
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Paramount Pictures with The Big Short, the true story of the four outsiders who risked it all to uncover the biggest fraud in U.S. history. Nominated for 4 Golden Globe Awards, including Best Actor Steve Carell, Best Actor Christian Bale, and Best Picture of the Year. The Big Short stars Christian Bale, Steve Carell, Ryan Gosling, Melissa Leo, Brad Pitt, and Marissa Tomei, now playing everywhere.
Usually in these cases, the person who commits the crime, if you call them up, they will just not call you back, or they'll say, talk to my lawyer, and then the lawyer will not call you back. This case is different. So you're the guy in the photo.
I am the guy in the photo, yeah.
This is Scott London.
I've been, I was a CPA.
A CPA, a certified public accountant. Scott was an accountant working at one of the biggest accounting firms in the world, KPMG, and he was good at his job. He got promoted over the years to where he was overseeing 500 people spread across a whole region.
And he says it was the kind of job you could feel good about. They were conducting audits of hundreds of publicly traded companies, making sure those companies weren't cooking their books or making something up. Scott says all the big decisions ran through him.
And in the course of doing that, what do you learn about a company?
Everything.
Everything.
Really, everything. What's going on internationally, what's going on liquidity-wise, what's going on with future projections.
I feel like you would know as much as almost anybody inside the company about the company.
Yes.
This was, of course, very valuable information he was being entrusted with. And Scott says it was super clear that it was supposed to remain confidential. The whole point of the audits was to ensure fairness in the marketplace. They would check and approve the company's financial statements, and then that information would be released to the world. Everyone would get it at the same time, a level playing field.
Scott says they had ethics training classes every year or so, reminding people about the importance of keeping the information secret, of keeping it confidential. And as a boss, Scott says he was often the one telling people to be careful, not to even let anything be overheard accidentally.
And there were numerous occurrences where, you know, you're on the 30th floor of an office building, you all head down as a group to lunch, go get a bite to eat, and you're in the elevator and you get on floor 30, someone gets on floor 20.
Everyone's still talking about work.
I had to just kind of put my finger up to my lips or do like the stop sign over your neck. You say, you know, hey, stop talking, that type of thing.
Sometimes his friends would ask him, hey, you got any stock tips? And his answer was always, no, I can't tell you anything, sorry.
But it is hard not to talk about work at all. And Scott had this one friend named Brian Shaw. They belonged to the same country club.
We went out for dinner and we played golf and we occasionally traveled together. We went to concerts together.
Scott says they were pals. It was one of those nice relationships, that exist kind of outside of the family part of your life. They weren't hanging out because their kids liked each other. They liked each other.
And Brian was in the wholesale jewelry business, but sometimes he and Scott talked about stocks in a very safe way. Until one day when Scott's friend, makes this proposal.
He goes, hey, I know a way that we can both make a little bit of money. You give me information, I'm going to trade on it. I will split it 3 ways. I keep a third, you keep a third, and the government gets a third in income tax, capital gains taxes.
What did you think when he said that?
My initial reaction was that, I was joking. I said, well, we can't do that.
Scott definitely does not need the money. He's making more than $500,000 a year. But he says his friend Brian's jewelry business is doing really badly. This is right after the financial crisis. And his friend says he needs some help. So Scott considers it. He thinks, what if we give him just a little bit of information?
What was going through your head at the time?
It's a battle. The simple version of one side is that I knew it was wrong. It was stupid. And then the other side is, all right, well, he's a good friend. I trust him. If you're trading and you're only going to make $10,000 or $15,000, who's going to know?
Scott decided, okay, I'll do it. And he stepped across that line that for years he'd been telling people not to cross. And here is how the insider trading actually worked. Scott agreed to pass Brian information. They did this about companies you may have heard of, including Skechers, the shoe company, and Herbalife, that company that makes weight loss shakes.
So, for example, just before Herbalife was about to release its earnings report to the public, saying, hey, we had a really good quarter, Scott and Brian would talk on the phone. Scott would tell Brian what those results were going to be in advance, before the public knew.
Brian would buy the stock or place a bet that the stock was going to go up in price. Then the official announcement would come out, and the rest of the world would learn about it.
Yeah, we'll play a little tape from CNBC here. Brace yourself.
Herbalife reported a Thing of Beauty quarter, with earnings coming in at $1.43 per share, 22-cent beat on revenues that rose 28.5% year over year. Like maybe only Amazon had better than that.
News like this comes out, the stock price goes up. You could make thousands of dollars in a moment, in a minute, just from having that little piece of information before everybody else.
But here is something super weird to think about. Where exactly did that money come from? Who got robbed here? It's kind of a brain teaser to think about. Jacob, you and I spent a long time trying to work this out with diagrams on a piece of paper.
Yeah, we were like drawing circles on paper and lines like, okay, here's the insider trader and here's the money. And wait, who is the victim? Who is on the other end?
It's kind of tricky to think about because, if Brian buys stock, right, he bought that stock from somebody. So you could say the person who sold that stock to him, that's the person who got robbed because the stock went up in price.
Yeah, but that person wanted to sell that stock at that price. If Brian hadn't bought it, someone else would have. The seller, that is not the victim.
We are not the only people who have struggled to figure this out. There are a bunch of academic papers about this. And here I think is the answer. Somebody was definitely harmed. It's just really hard to know who.
Think of it this way. For purposes of explanation, imagine that Brian had bought 10 shares of Herbalife stock. Okay, that is 10 shares that someone else doesn't own because Brian owns it. We don't know who would have owned it if Brian didn't exist, but somebody would have owned it. That somebody, that unknowable somebody, would have profited when the stock went up. That unknowable somebody, that is the victim. That is the person who got robbed.
You're looking for someone who doesn't own the stock.
Yeah.
There are lots of people out there who don't own the stock. I think if Brian had gone to Scott and said, hey, let's rob someone's house, there's no way Scott would have said yes. But this felt different. Scott says that was part of his thinking at the time. It felt like a victimless crime.
Scott says he gave Brian inside information about a dozen times. And he says Brian paid him for that information in all these different ways. Once he gave him a watch, a Rolex. Another time he bought expensive tickets to a Bruce Springsteen concert. Sometimes he just gave him cash.
Usually they do the exchange indoors somewhere. Once, though, Brian called and asked to meet in a Starbucks parking lot.
He was going to be traveling. He was going to be going someplace. He absolutely wanted me to get this money in my hand. Is there any way you could meet me? Like, okay, well, I'm at work, just a couple miles away. I could meet you there if you really want to. And he says, yeah, let's do that.
They meet at the parking lot. Nearby, there is a camera. Hence that photo that would later be all over the press of Scott taking the envelope stuffed with money.
$5,000 in cash.
In hundreds or what?
Yeah, all hundreds. $50, $100 bills.
What do you do with
$50, $100 bills?
To be specific, I put it in my underwear drawer in my closet.
I always wonder where you should hide money. Not long after that, Scott remembers the date because it was his wife's birthday. He was home alone in the morning, getting ready for work, and there's this knock on the door.
Well, the door is somewhat beveled glass. All I could see was kind of just two images. The first reaction that I had was it was two Jehovah's Witnesses.
He opens the door, and two men show him their FBI badges.
And they asked, can we come in? And I said, of course, and they came in. It was probably a 30-step walk from the front door to the kitchen table where we sat. Nobody else was home.
They show him that photo in the parking lot. Said there were agents at his friend Brian's house right then. And as Scott is sitting there, he sees all the dominoes that are about to fall.
It was like, okay, what's my wife going to say? What are my friends going to say? Oh, shit, what is KPMG going to say? Oh, shit, I'm going to lose my job. Oh, shit, I'm going to owe a lot of money. Oh, shit, I'm going to go to prison.
It got worse. Scott got a lawyer, and one day they were on their way to court in the lawyer's car. Scott's reading the news on his phone, and he sees this story about his case that has something he says he didn't know. His friend Brian hadn't been just making small trades for a few $1,000s. The story says Brian had been placing much bigger trades. It says he made $1.27 million.
And I almost threw up right there in the car. And I actually told my attorney, he got pulled over. He was driving, but I was just fearful that I was just going to lose it right there. So I just couldn't believe it. And once I saw that, I said, holy hell, this is obviously going to be a lot worse.
Scott also learned something else. After his friend Brian had gotten caught, Brian helped the FBI set up a sting. Some of those last phone calls had been recorded, and that meeting in the Starbucks parking lot with the envelope, that was a setup. It was all spelled out in court documents.
And then, of course, there were the TV cameras and the reporter standing up in front of the country club.
All started here, seemingly innocent enough. Back in 2005, two guys joined the North Ranch Country Club, which is gorgeous. They become golfing friends and buddies.
The whole thing goes before a judge. And here's where we get to another odd thing. A thing, frankly, that I found surprising when I started learning about this whole thing, and that is the way the law treats insider trading.
We talked to Sarah Baumgartel. She's worked as a defense attorney. She's now a fellow at Yale Law School.
Something interesting about insider trading law in the United States is that there's actually no law against insider trading.
So there is no law that says, like, the insider trading law passed by Congress or whatever?
Correct. There is no law like that. And in typical congressional fashion, they have increased the penalties for whatever insider trading is without defining it.
And she says, while everybody gets upset at insider trading because it gives someone an unfair advantage, that is not the legal reason why it gets you into trouble. The argument used these days in court for why it's illegal is that insider trading amounts to stealing information from a company. It's like theft.
And so for that reason, proving that someone traded on insider information, that is not enough to convict them. If, say, a financial document from some company blows out the window and you happen to find it sitting there on the sidewalk, Sarah says it's not insider trading for you to use that to make money in the stock market because you didn't steal it.
One other box you got to check, the person providing the information, that person has to benefit somehow.
And in fact, a bunch of high-profile insider trading cases were recently dropped because an appeals court ruled that among other things, the person providing the tip, providing the information, that person has to benefit in some substantial way.
So we ran through Scott London's case with Sarah to see if it met all the criteria. 1, did he give away information that he had a legal duty to protect?
Yes, absolutely.
Did someone trade on that information?
100% yes.
Did Scott London benefit?
We told Sarah about that photo of Scott getting cash in a parking lot.
That sounds bad.
He agrees with you.
So is he guilty of insider trading?
Is this a trick? It sounds like he's very obviously guilty of insider trading.
He pled guilty immediately, and he knew he was doing it the whole time.
All right, good. That's a relief.
Scott confessed right away when the FBI came to his house. And the sense I got in talking to Scott is that he's one of those people, if you ask him a question, he is just going to answer it.
Here's Scott on the courthouse steps. A TV reporter asked him a question about how much money he made from the insider trading, and he doesn't, dodge the question. He doesn't run to the car. He gives this very complete accountant-like answer, just listing off each thing he got.
I received about $50,000 in cash, a watch that I was led to believe was worth about $10,000, the Rolex, and about 3 or 4 other items that were destined for my wife, that I gave to my wife, that were appraised recently for just under $10,000. So if you add it all up, about 70 grand.
And is that all going to be given back?
Most of it has been given back. The money through the payment of the bond, the watch has been given back, and the jewelry is actually in my car, and we just couldn't give it back today because the agents weren't present, but that's the plan.
The people back in the studio on TV after this, they were talking about it like, who risks their $500,000 a year job for $70,000?
Scott says his friends asked him that too, and he does not have a great answer. He can't say exactly why he did it. I asked, was it exciting? Was the thrill part of it?
No, wasn't exciting at all.
Was he trying to get his friend to like him more? Is that what was going on?
No, that didn't ever pass through my mind.
Scott says he was kind of overworked and unhappy with his job, so everything felt a little less important. Maybe that had something to do with it. But he says crossing over that line was somehow just not as hard as it should have been.
Scott says what he did was just dumb. He says that, but he says, as best as he can figure out, as best as he can reconstruct, he did it to help out his friend. And he says he didn't think they were going to get caught.
Scott was sentenced to 14 months in prison. He was given a window to turn himself in. Because of a mix-up, he ended up spending a month in solitary confinement, but most of the time he was in a minimum security prison. He spent a lot of time walking around this track they had, listening to a small transistor radio, telling other inmates, "No, I can't help you figure out that accounting issue with your marijuana business." Scott was released this summer, a couple months early for good behavior.
I think about what I did every day. I think, that there's downer days, but for the most part, 80% of the time I have good days, but I think about how life would have been different.
Were you able to go back to your personal life?
Yeah, 100% of it. Yes, I committed a felony. There's no doubt. I did something bad. But, I'm 53 years old, and that what I did there does not, in my opinion, did not define my personality and who I am at a core. My friends understand that. They'll say right to my face, "You're an idiot. I can't believe you did that, but I still love you. And I still would, stand right behind you if you ever needed help."
Do you still belong to that country club?
No, they kicked me out.
You ever see Brian Shaw?
I have not seen him or spoken to him since the day he gave me that package in the Starbucks parking lot.
Scott says they do live in the same area, and they go to the same restaurants, so he knows he's going to run into him sometime.
And of course, we asked him, what do you think's going to happen when you do see him?
He said, "I'm not going to hit him. It's not like I'm going to punch him in the face. I just want to tell him, when the FBI caught you, you should have just come to me. I would have turned myself in. We could have skipped all the drama. And there never would have been that embarrassing photo in the Starbucks parking lot."
I never told you that I was blind until the day I met your funny, pretty smile.
One last thing, I did call Brian Shaw when I was working on this story. He answered the phone, I told him who I was, and he said he was not interested in talking.
You can send us email. We are planetmoney@npr.org. Tweet us at planetmoney.
We're also looking for an intern for summer 2016. You can apply on our blog, npr.org/money.
Our show today was produced by Jess Jang.
Special thanks to Bill Wong.
The job description says frequent travel may be required. NASA is accepting applications for a new class of astronauts. You log into the usajobs.gov, search for astronaut, and upload your resume and references. Easy. Okay, not so easy. The last time NASA did this, the acceptance rate was less than 1%. So who has the right stuff? NPR's Adam Cole spoke to 2 former astronauts and 1 astronaut hopeful about the path to space.
For Charlie Bolden, it started in 7th grade. He'd hurry home after school to catch his favorite show.
Men of Annapolis. It was a regular program on television.
Yes, this is Annapolis, the United States Naval Academy.
That's where I wanted to go to college.
But Bolden was a black teenager from the segregated South, and his congressman wouldn't give him the required nomination. An Illinois congressman opened the way to the academy instead, and Bolden began his military career. He flew in Vietnam, became a test pilot, and was selected to become an astronaut in 1980, the beginning of the space shuttle era. For Mike Massimino,
That's one small step for man.
I was 6 years old when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon and wanted to be an astronaut, dressed up like an astronaut for Halloween, played astronaut in my backyard with my little astronaut Snoopy.
But growing up in Franklin Square, Long Island, that dream started to seem ridiculous.
I didn't know anybody that was an astronaut.
So Massimino went to Columbia to become an engineer. There were lots of engineers in Long Island, but 16 years later, in 1996, he was accepted to the astronaut corps. Maria Banks is applying this year. In college, she studied harp performance, and when she graduated, she found a job playing on a cruise ship that traveled all over the world.
I would take soil samples and rock samples and hide them in my suitcase. And every day I would try to find the most geologically interesting thing I could do. Climb a volcano or hike a desert, hike on glaciers.
That sent her back to school, where she studied the fingerprints of glaciers on Mars. Different backgrounds, different eras, but these three people, a pilot, an engineer, and a planetary geologist, all felt the same way about applying.
I was convinced that I did not stand any chance.
I thought there was no way they were going to pick me.
I guess I didn't believe it was maybe an attainable goal.
But they still applied. The process hasn't changed much in the past 35 years. Everyone submits an application proving their basic qualifications. Astronauts need a degree in a scientific field and 3 years of experience. They need vision that's correctable to 20/20, and they can't be taller than 6'4". But most of all,
if you're not tops at what you're doing now, you're not going to be selected.
Charles Bolden was tops. He went on to pilot 2 shuttle missions and command. He helped put the Hubble telescope into orbit. Today, he's the head of NASA. Mike Massimino was tops too, but it took him 4 tries to get accepted. He first applied in 1989.
And I was told no.
Then 1991.
No, again, a second time.
In 1994, he made it to the interview round.
And then you go back and wait, and I was told no.
Finally, in 1996, he was accepted. He flew on 2 shuttle missions and helped repair the Hubble telescope. Today, he's a professor at Columbia. This round will be Maria Banks' 3rd attempt.
Just keep trying. Those are the words I kept hearing from all of the astronauts I talked with.
But if she's accepted, what will her mission be? The shuttle program ended in 2011, and since then, NASA has been accused of lacking clear goals. But Bolden says future astronauts have a lot to look forward to.
They are going to be the trailblazers for our ventures to Mars.
He says they'll fly new spacecraft and return to lunar orbit for the first time since 1972.
It all sounds fantastic to me. I would be happy doing just about anything.
She's preparing to submit her application before the February 18th deadline. Adam Cole, NPR News.
It's been a high-stakes year for high-stakes standardized tests taken by students in public schools. The debate over the new federal education law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, turned in part on whether annual testing would remain a federal mandate. Ultimately, the overhaul passed, with the test still in place. On the other hand, this fall, President Obama released a testing action plan. He's calling for states to cut down unnecessary testing that creates, quote, undue stress for educators and students. For more on the changes we're likely to see in school testing in 2016, we turned to Anya Kamenetz of the NPR Ed team, who's been following these issues very closely. Good morning.
Hi, Renee.
And annual tests are still in place, so what's different now?
What's really different are the stakes. So instead of the federal government, as it did under No Child Left Behind, mandating that every single child perform at grade level and dictating the sanctions for schools where students are falling behind, now every state can pretty much set up its own plan for improving schools. And at the same time, states are encouraged a little bit to de-emphasize test scores in their accountability formulas in favor of multiple measures of student success like behavior, attendance, graduation rates, even student surveys.
It sounds a little bit more relaxed, but does that mean testing and test prep is likely to fade?
Well, it's hard to say. You know, the Department of Education and the president have been putting out the message that there's too much testing, and they're certainly responding to the public in that way, and they're providing resources in this bill for states to audit and to streamline their testing programs. The problem is that many districts have to wait, sometimes for months, before they get their state test scores. So they still need to give their own diagnostic tests in order to get information they can use in the classroom. And as long as test scores remain linked to accountability measures, districts will still want to give benchmark and practice tests and spend time prepping students. And it's all this district-level testing and the prepping that really does seem to pile up and add to the stress on students.
And how exactly does the Common Core relate to all of this testing?
Well, I think of a lot of the stress isn't just around the sheer number of tests, but also around all the changes in state policies. And the Common Core, of course, is really central to that. So initially, as part of the run-up to the Common Core, boosters said that if states adopted the same standards and just a handful of aligned tests, that we would simplify testing and get scores that we could compare across states. But that hasn't happened. Instead, there's been a really chaotic process of states picking up and dropping the standards, picking up and dropping various tests. And according to a report this year, 65% of the biggest school districts in the country saw a change in their big state tests in the last 5 years. So not only can we not compare performance across many states, the same districts can't compare their own performance to 5 years ago.
And what about the politics of testing? Because this has become quite politicized. Will the opt-out movement continue to grow?
Even as the opt-out movement has been running high last spring in states like New York, national polls reported that a majority of Americans don't support sitting kids out of mandated tests. And one important political change in the new federal law is that states no longer have to make test scores a central part of teacher evaluations. And it was this one issue, the linking of test scores to teacher evaluations, that really mobilized teacher unions in particular against tests. And so I think that even if the new law doesn't cut back on testing, it may have effectively neutralized some of the opposition to testing.
Anya, thanks very much.
Thanks, Renee.
Anya Kamenetz of the NPR Ed Team.
I'm Flora Lichtman, and this is The Adapters. Full disclosure, I have a deep and nostalgic personal connection to this story. I've been obsessed with it for 20 years, literally since I was a tween. It began with this family car trip to Taos, New Mexico, and you have to just picture the landscape. It's those big skies with the vast sagebrush deserts in various shades of green. It's just beautiful. And suddenly on the side of the road, we see this bizarre-looking hobbit home. Squat and kind of curvy. It almost looked like a greenhouse submerged in the ground. There was a solar panel or two. Oh, and the building materials were really bizarre. So there were these glass bottles of different colors that were making designs, almost like stained glass. And we're driving along and we saw this first one. And then, as we kept driving, we saw, maybe a dozen more. And this was pre-Googling. So it remained this big, giant mystery of our trip. And for many years later, who lived in these? What were they? Who designed them? Why are they there?
Yeah, it's radical. There's no question. It's radical to say that everything that we're doing and the way we're doing it is a mess.
Michael Reynolds invented these homes.
I used to be an architect in New Mexico until they took my license away.
They're called Earthships, and producer Catherine Wells and I basically made my long-standing dream come true. We went out to Taos to meet their maker. So Reynolds started building Earthships back in the 70s.
And I found myself fresh out of architectural school, and I just said, well, hell, we build out of trees, but we don't want to get rid of them. And we want to get rid of garbage. Why don't we try to build out of garbage?
He started with aluminum cans, cementing them together like bricks. He's moved on since to old tires, which he rams with dirt, stacks, and then coats in cement. And these make the load-bearing walls. The Earthships are built partially underground to help control temperature, and that big row of windows are positioned to allow the sun to stream in and warm up the home. The roof collects rainwater in cisterns, and today there are probably several hundred people living in Earthships scattered around Taos, and there are standalone Earthships all over the world, commissioned by people who had heard about Reynolds' designs and wanted to try them out in other places.
The end result of this concept building is that it does not need infrastructure. It does not need a nuclear or a coal-fired power plant. It does not need things.
They're totally off-grid, no water main, no sewage line, no power lines, nothing.
It started to be kind of a contrived effort to recycle and has ended up the best way I know of to build, regardless of recycling.
In the main Earthship community outside of Taos, there's a visitor center. It's got big signs welcoming people to come in and check it out.
So much. Hey, good morning. How are you?
Senior and one adult.
One senior and one adult. And have you been to the visitor center before? No. Okay, it's basically a self-guided tour through this.
There's even a 10-minute informational video that Michael narrated.
Custom Earthships combine basic principles in your personal dreams. If you've got a pocketbook to match, the sky's the limit.
We hung out at the visitor center for a while, and the people coming through were mostly middle-aged or retired couples. They seemed to be on road trips through the area. And what you're about to hear was pretty representative of people's first impressions, before they even went into the visitor center, just from what they could see from the road.
Oh, I don't know. It's weird. But no, it's amazing.
Well, your first impression when driving down the road is like weird.
Well, my initial thought is like, what the heck? These people live like this? It's really weird and really creative.
Can you imagine living in a house like this?
No.
Could you?
No, ma'am, I can't.
The world is not going to build weird houses. They just don't look right to them.
People look at this and call it a Mad Max compound or something like that. They call it trashy and a bunch of dirty hippies that don't know how to clean up the land.
We have pictures of the Earthships on our website, theadapters.org, so you can go get a visual. And the Earthshippers do give off a kind of hippie vibe, Michael and the people we met who worked there, but not necessarily in the way that I would have expected.
I'm so sick of recycling and sustainable and green and organic. I mean, they're rhetoric things. I like logic. It's logical how we should live on this planet. Logic is the best guide.
What do you think about climate change?
I don't know whether it's climate change. I don't know whether it's global warming. I don't really care. The planet is changing for lots of reasons. We don't have to blame it on anybody. Just recognize that it's changing and be able to survive without any man-made infrastructure now.
Michael has refined his garbage building methods for 30 years, figuring out how to keep the temperature more stable inside without heating or cooling, or how to use plants to recycle sewage. He thinks of these homes as experiments. That's how he describes them. But this approach has gotten him in trouble, mainly with building code officers. So standard building codes don't even cover the materials that Michael's using. There's no standard for how much weight tire buildings can bear or how you build with aluminum cans. Back in the early 2000s, the state of New Mexico actually shut down Earthship construction and stripped Michael of his architect's license in the state. This led to a multi-year battle in the state legislature, and eventually Michael got an exception added to the building code in the state for his experimental work so he can build again.
I'm all about failing. I mean, I expect to fail the first 6 or 8 times I do something, but if I fail that many times, I'm going to get it eventually, and it's going to be good. So, I mean, failure is a method, really, but in our culture, it's a taboo thing. It's a bad thing to fail.
Michael started taking his method and this way of building to other countries, too, especially for disaster relief.
It got out there what we were doing, and after there was a tsunami or something, got emails saying, I hear you can make shelter out of what's laying around, and you can harvest water, and you can make systems that keep sanitation, happening so people don't get cholera. Because this is the sewage system right here. And can you come help us?
He went to Haiti after the earthquake. They built Earthships in India's Andaman Islands after the tsunami.
That's an education for us. That's a free ticket to do whatever we want because they'll appreciate anything we do. So we would just go and do our best, and we would learn all kinds of things that we'd bring back here and try out and then take them back to other countries. And I'm starting to see a merger of our work around the world in disaster relief sort of blending into the work that we do for clients, because most clients are a disaster. So disaster relief for these little disasters, well, it's pretty much the same thing as the big disaster that's happening.
How responsible do you feel for the planet? I mean, most people don't feel very responsible at all, right?
Well, I'm not responsible for the planet. I'm just a person. I just was born here, you know. I'm not trying to save the planet. I'm not responsible for it. I kind of look at it like I'm on a bus. You know, the planet has 7 billion people on it now. I'm on a bus with 70 people. I'm not responsible for that bus, but I'm on the bus. I feel the bus. I feel if somebody's smoking a dioxin cigar, I'm on the bus. It's my ass here that's getting polluted. If there's a weird vibe on the bus because somebody's got a bacon and lettuce and tomato sandwich and everybody else doesn't, I'm on the bus. I feel it. So I'm really just trying to make the world around me, and now the world is such a small place, it's the entire globe, I'm trying to make the world around me comfortable for me. And I see that involves everybody else on the planet.
Why do you think people are so hard to convince? Why do you think it's so difficult for us to imagine a different way to do things?
I think it's just kind of human nature, the gravity of the situation, tradition, culture. You know, I think tradition and culture, you know, are nice. They should be in magazines on coffee table books, but they shouldn't be in our way of evolution, and they are. Tradition and culture are two of our biggest enemies, in my opinion. They stop us from evolving. Well, it was a long, slow, hard lesson for me to realize that what I liked, other people didn't like. You know, I mean, what I liked didn't make any difference, but it would shine a light in the direction of what made a difference, but you have to make it palatable.
When Reynolds realized this, he started modifying his designs to make them more traditional. So he has this model home that we visited. It has a flat screen TV, a washer dryer, doors and hallways that divide up the spaces, and it's priced at $400,000. The most basic models, by the way, are around $25,000, and this is to have the Earthship company build them for you. So this model home, you know, it doesn't feel exactly like a normal house because of the giant greenhouse and its railroad shape, but it doesn't feel that far away either.
Palatability is a phenomenon. It's a gravity. You have to give people something in a way that they can take it. A good way to look at it is if you have a dog that has worms, and the dog needs this worm pill. So you're going to open his mouth and hold his mouth open and cram the worm pill down his throat. He's going to choke and spit and bite you and everything, and maybe you'll get it down there, but he'll spit it right back up. Take the worm pill and put it in a ball of hamburger. Throw it at the dog. He'll catch it in midair and swallow it. That's palatability. So I'm starting to play that game with everything. You know, I put it all in a ball of hamburger.
How does that feel to play that game?
Smarter than the dog.
Why aren't more people buying it?
They are. It's crescendoing. We're not cramming it down people's throats. We're letting word of mouth spread it, and it is spreading, sort of like a virus. It's like, you know, it's infecting people. So we aren't really having to go around and convince people. We're just going around and sneezing on them.
Good morning. One sneeze zone is the Earthship Academy, where Reynolds and Earthship staffers teach students how to replicate the techniques he's developed. So students come out for about a month, and we notice mostly 20-somethings. They live in an Earthship dorm, they take classes, and they work on building Earthships. And to Michael's point about crescendoing, the company estimates that there are now about 2,000 Earthships around the world. So the visitor center is also intended as an infection site, and interestingly, it seems to kind of work. So after people finished the tour, many people came out and had kind of changed their tune.
I would definitely, if I was younger, I would consider doing something like that.
I think it's great. I attracted to the architecture, the reuse of materials. It's just fantastic.
Can you imagine living in an Earthship?
Oh, sure, yeah. It seemed very comfortable.
Well, I'm really pleasantly surprised what the interior looks like.
Well, sure, I could imagine living in one. That's easy.
Can you imagine it catching on?
I really can.
We turn now to China and a very different kind of change happening there. Sales of electric vehicles booming. That's good for a country with a big pollution problem, and until recently, not many clean cars on the road. But they've quickly become a bright spot for China's economy, which has been sliding. Our colleague David Green spoke with NPR Shanghai correspondent Frank Langfitt to find out what's driving the trend.
Why are these sales of these kinds of cars just booming at the moment?
Well, it's really interesting to see what the government's been doing to make this happen. First of all, just to go to the numbers, 170,000 of these electric cars and plug-in hybrids through October. That's 3 times what sales were last year already. And in Shanghai, their wait lists up to 6 months. And put this in perspective, when I hike this, it's less than 1% of the overall market here. But China's now easily set to pass the U.S. as the biggest market for electrics and hybrids. And basically, the government has wanted to make this change. They are very concerned about the quality of air. They're concerned about congestion on the roads. And they also want to help Chinese electric car makers.
And all of this, it sounds like, has happened very, very quickly.
It is a big, big change. I remember maybe 3 or 4 years ago out having some beers with some American auto execs, and I was looking for stories, and I asked about electric vehicles, because it would be a good story. And they all said really the market was mostly dead. And the big problem, of course, is there's no infrastructure to charge these cars. What the government's been doing, though, is offering these really great discounts, and people are flocking to the cars right now in a way that they weren't before.
What are some of the deals? I mean, are we thinking of the kinds of car advertisements that we see and hear in the U.S.?
No, much, much better, actually. Do you remember there was this electronics store called Crazy Eddie's back in the 70s and the 80s, and they had these wild commercials, and they would say, his prices are insane. The Communist Party is now the Crazy Eddie of electric vehicles. And I would have actually gotten one if I could. I don't have a Shanghai residency permit, so only I think mostly Chinese people can get one. But my assistant Yang just bought one.
And Yang is with you, right, as I understand it?
He is. He's sitting right next to me.
Hi, David.
So what kind of car did you buy, and how good a deal did you get?
I bought a hybrid model from a Chinese car maker called BYD, and it stands for Build Your Dreams. I paid $24,000 for the car, and that's 30% off the sticker price. But I paid no purchase tax, and the best thing that comes with the car is a free Shanghai license plate, which is worth $13,000.
What? Wait, a license plate costs $13,000?
Yes.
And I complain about going to the DMV here. I mean, why does the license plate cost so much?
Because the license plate is incredibly valuable here. It allows me to drive the elevated highways during rush hour. That's a way for the city government to control congestion by limiting the number of cars on the highways. Without the plate, I would have to crawl along the surface streets in Shanghai.
Avoiding traffic is a big deal. I can understand now why you're building your dreams, Yang. But let me ask you about the hard thing, which is the charging. Frank mentioned that it's really hard to charge these vehicles. I mean, I've visited Frank in Shanghai. I know there's skyscrapers and high-rises. Where exactly do you charge this thing?
I have to admit that charging the car is really a hassle. Every time I do it, I have to lower an extension cord from my apartment, which is on the 11th floor.
That's a long extension cord, Yang.
Oh yeah, it's very long and it's really heavy. It takes 7 hours to charge the car, and the car can drive 40 miles on one charge. But fortunately, I don't have to charge the car every day. But I do expect that the infrastructure for these kind of vehicles will get better over time, because Chinese government has planned to build 12,000 charging stations by the year 2020.
Well, Yang, thanks for telling us about your car purchase. Hey, Frank, let me just ask you, I mean, it sounds like the government has, as you said, a lot of reasons to get people buying these new energy vehicles. I mean, are they going to be offering deals like this for the foreseeable future?
Well, Shanghai's hinting that it'll keep doing it, but obviously these kind of giveaways can't go on forever. And the hope is, just as in the United States, you try to jumpstart demand by offering these great deals and create interest. And then hopefully, over time, people will start buying them even after the discounts go away.
That's NPR's Frank Langford and also his news assistant Yang Zhuo in Shanghai. Thank you both.
Happy to do it, David.
Thank you.
Are hospitals doing everything they should to make sure they're correct when they declare patients brain dead? That's the provocative question being raised by new research that came out today in the journal JAMA Neurology. NPR health correspondent Rob Stein explains what the researchers found.
5 years ago, the American Academy of Neurology issued guidelines for every hospital to follow when declaring someone brain dead. David Greer of the Yale University School of Medicine helped write the rules.
This is truly one of those matters of life and death, and we want to make sure that this is done right every single time.
The experts hoped uniform guidelines would eliminate any doubt about when someone could be considered truly brain dead.
The worst case scenario would be if we were to pronounce somebody brain dead and then they recovered some neurological function. That would be horrific if that were the case. So we have to be 100% accurate about this every single time.
Greer and his colleagues decided to take a look at what hospitals are actually doing 5 years later. So they surveyed.
The camera on your smartphone is powerful. It can record your baby's first steps or take a panorama of the Taj Mahal. Also, selfies. Recently, a startup in Silicon Valley realized a camera on the phone could be used by people who are blind to help them see remotely. NPR's Arthi Shahani reports.
I'm in the home of Lisa Maria Martinez. She's got a little bit of vision,
but I grew up reading Braille, so print is not my forte.
Which makes it very hard to read labels, especially those fancy fonts on food packaging. Martinez wants to make spaghetti before her husband and kids get home.
And I'm cheating, and I'm going to use a pre-made sauce.
Lisa Maria, I'm disappointed in you. You're pre-made?
I know.
But it's a weekday, time for shortcuts. Martinez already has the key ingredients on the table. Tell me what we got.
I don't know.
And that is the task at hand, to sort out what's inside the jars she's pulled from her pantry. She's going to use this app on her iPhone called Be My Eyes. She taps the icon to launch.
Creating request. Connecting to servers.
You could also launch it using voice command.
Waiting for other part.
Be My Eyes is a pretty simple concept. The person who's blind connects to people with sight, points the smartphone camera to things, and gets help seeing what they are. The app rings, this monotonous droning ring, until both sides are connected.
Connected to other part.
The other part, so to speak, is volunteer Kaylee Bennett. They say hi, and Martinez points her phone.
So I'm holding up a can.
Bennett reads the label.
They are chili beans.
Next jar.
Basil pesto.
Pesto. And finally,
that is Parmesan, Asago.
It's a 3-cheese sauce, which Martinez decides she's going to use. Now, there's a cool little detail about the location of her volunteer.
I'm on a holiday in Exmouth, at the top of Australia.
Bennett is from Australia on a family vacation on the northern tip of that continent, and she happens to have an internet connection with video chat. This is an unconventional volunteer setup. I ask her, you decided to get on this app while you're on holiday?
Yeah, well, they just call you whenever. It just comes up as a notification.
Be My Eyes isn't just a way to help the blind. It's an experiment in online engagement. To date, the main way you can do good on the internet is by signing a petition or donating money. Here, you can hop on a quick call to action. Clock in some micro-volunteering.
You have a chance just to step in or step out of your everyday life just for a brief moment and then do something good within a couple of minutes.
Be My Eyes CEO Christian Erfurt.
I think that's very appealing for people.
The numbers suggest he's right. The startup has more than 24,000 blind users registered and 300,000 volunteers. They have seen a couple dozen cases of abuse.
Mostly prank calls from teenage boys pretending to be blind.
But mostly, people are just trying to help. And to be a truly on-demand service, they need more volunteers. Though one should not volunteer at any expense. For example,
creating request. Connecting to servers.
Back in Lisa Maria Martinez's home, we get connected to Bua Botkatmani, a student who's never done community service. She says this is her very first time. The app popped up in her Facebook stream. She helps Martinez sort through the colors of some yarn for knitting.
This one has many colors.
Uh-huh.
Pink, yellow, blue, and white.
Okay, perfect.
And when they're done, I ask Botkatmani where she currently is, by which I mean what country. But Martinez and I get a much more specific answer.
I'm in the car.
Oh, you're in the car. Oh, my gosh. That's right. She's in Thailand in a car. And by that, she doesn't mean in the back seat. You're in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
So why are you on the app also?
I want to help you.
While this is very sweet and bizarrely global, the last thing the world needs is a headline about an altruistic young woman in Thailand who crashed her car while helping a blind lady in California see. Wherever you are, if you're going to try Be My Eyes, please do it safely. Aarti Shahani, NPR News, Silicon Valley.
New York City is on track to end the year with crime rates lower than the previous year. In fact, the city is the safest it's been in modern history. But NPR's Joel Rose reports that many New Yorkers say they don't feel any safer.
1,100 of the New York Police Department's newest officers celebrate under a shower of confetti today on the floor of Madison Square Garden. The mood was strikingly different from the graduation ceremony a year ago. Back then, 2 NYPD policemen had just been shot. At funerals, scores of officers turned their backs on Mayor Bill de Blasio, and what followed was a major slowdown in the number of summonses and tickets issued across the department. Still, after all that, crime in New York City kept dropping.
The NYPD keeps setting records. The NYPD keeps going farther.
Mayor Bill de Blasio rolled out some numbers to back up his point. According to NYPD statistics, overall crime is down about 2% this year. Shootings are down 2%, murders edged up slightly, but they're still near the all-time low set last year.
We're not going back to the bad old days, and the reason we're not going back to the bad old days is all of you.
But no matter how often the mayor repeats this message, and he does repeat it, not everyone feels safer. According to polls, the number of New Yorkers who think crime is a serious problem is going up, not down. Heather MacDonald is a fellow at the conservative Manhattan Institute. She thinks that's partly a result of the record number of homeless people.
There has been a documented increase in street vagrancy over the last year, and that gives people a sense that public order and law and order is breaking down.
The NYPD has cut back drastically on the number of people it stops and frisks without a warrant and the number of low-level summonses it hands out. Critics predicted that would lead to a spike in crime. That did not happen, but former Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, a staunch advocate of stop and frisk, says you can't always trust the statistics.
You have to take a hard look at those numbers. And I can tell you, people don't feel safer in this city.
In a radio interview with AM 970 that's scheduled to air next month, Kelly says the NYPD might be manipulating the numbers.
I think there's some redefinition going on as to what amounts to a shooting.
It's worth noting that critics leveled similar charges against the NYPD when he was commissioner. Ray Kelly rejected the charge then, and his successor, Police Commissioner William Bratton, rejects it now.
My cops work hard, very hard, to reduce gun violence in the city. So for him to denigrate that hard work that has resulted in shootings being reduced significantly in the city and claim in some fashion
Bratton says crime is on the way down, while morale at the NYPD is on the rise. Few get that combination at the beginning of the year. Joel Rose, NPR News, New York.
WNYC New York Public Radio is right here.
This is NPR One.
Public radio made personal.
Members of Congress are enjoying a holiday break. The House returns to work on January 5th, 2016, and the Senate is back a week after that. So joining us now with a look forward to Congress in 2016 is NPR congressional correspondent Ailsa Chang. Hi there, Ailsa.
Hey there.
So before we do jump forward into 2016, let's take stock of what Congress got done this year. There were a couple things. A huge spending bill earlier this month and a long-term highway bill. What else?
Well, a bunch of stuff, actually. They managed to pass hundreds of billions of dollars worth of tax breaks, and they suspended the debt ceiling until March 2017, so we aren't going to be seeing debt ceiling fights until well after the election. They also managed to pass a massive rewrite of No Child Left Behind. That's the landmark education law from 2002. And then there was also the so-called Doc Fix bill, which may be a little more obscure to listeners. But Congress finally cleared a bill that permanently ends automatic cuts to Medicare payments for doctors. Doctors have had to keep contending with these cuts for years. It was a long-standing problem that Congress finally solved this year. So it was a year of unusual bipartisanship where some hard problems actually got resolved.
Oh, interesting. So even the most hard-bitten political cynics amongst us need to congratulate Congress for a year of good work. I mean, is there any chance that all this bipartisanship or the desire to get work done is going to continue into the next session, the next year?
Well, it is going to be an election year, obviously, and election years are notorious for being unproductive years in Congress. It's when leaders want to play it safe. They don't want to be ramming through tough legislation that forces tough votes on their colleagues. And we'll see this play out especially in the Senate. Republican control of that chamber is more up in the air than Republican control of the House. And there are a number of Senate Republicans running in states President Obama has won at least once. So they're going to try to play it safe before the election. We're probably not going to be seeing much bold bipartisan lawmaking in the Senate in 2016.
Oh, Elsa, okay, I still want to hold on to optimism, though. So let's talk about some of the priorities that maybe both President Obama and congressional leaders might share for 2016. I mean, sentencing reform has got to be one of them.
That's right. It is a possibility, though not a definite. Sentencing reform is one of those rare areas of common ground between the two parties. It's where we've seen alliances we hardly ever see, like Republican Mike Lee of Utah teaming up with Democrats like Cory Booker of New Jersey. Mike Lee is one of the most conservative members of the Senate. Basically, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are interested in reducing mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. And they also want to provide opportunities for inmates to reduce their sentences if they're, say, willing to enter rehab programs.
So finally, Elsa, I just want to touch on something that Speaker Ryan said was a priority for him when he became Speaker of the House, and that was getting back to the system of individual appropriation. So minor wonk alert here, but in the last couple seconds that we have, what does that mean?
It basically means individual appropriations bills for all the different parts of government, like defense, homeland security, agriculture. Basically, Congress has not gone through the traditional process of passing all these individual appropriations bills for years. Instead, they've been doing these massive consolidated bills right before a government shutdown deadline or a short-term stopgap spending bill. And leaders in both chambers say this time around in 2016, they are going to go through the traditional appropriations process and pass 12 appropriations bills.
Well, thank you, our congressional correspondent, Elsa Chang. Thank you, Elsa, and Happy New Year.
You're welcome. Happy New Year to you, too.
President Obama is making two arguments about ISIS. In an NPR interview, he says he is moving to destroy the extremist group. He added the U.S. must, quote, keep things in perspective. He says ISIS is weaker than some people may fear.
This is not an organization that can destroy the United States. This is not a huge industrial power. They can pose great risks to us institutionally or in a systematic way. But they can hurt us, and they can hurt our people and our families. And so I understand why people are worried.
And the president acknowledged to us that he has not done enough to reassure the public. We talked about ISIS as one part of a year-ending interview. We were sitting by a White House fireplace. We were in the cabinet room, on the red carpet where the president commonly meets advisors. Paintings of past presidents hung on the walls, and lessons of history were on my mind as our conversation began. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. I appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Steve.
I have been reading a history of part of the Cold War. Dwight Eisenhower was president. He's meeting his cabinet sometimes in this room where we're sitting. The Soviet Union has emerged as a major nuclear threat. The country is very worried. But Eisenhower is convinced that they're not that strong, that the United States is stronger, that the U.S. will win if we just avoid a huge war. And he decides to try to reassure the public. Gives a series of speeches saying, keep your chin up, everything's fine, our strategy is working. It's a total failure. The public doesn't believe him. He is accused of a failure of leadership, and his approval rating goes down. Are you going through the same experience now with regard to ISIS?
Well, I tell you, first of all, I wasn't the Supreme Allied Commander helping to defeat Hitler. So
He had some
he had a
credibility.
little credibility that he was working with. But ISIL is also not the Soviet Union. And I think that it is very important for us to understand this is a serious challenge. ISIS is a virulent, nasty organization that has gained a foothold in ungoverned spaces effectively in Syria and parts of Western Iraq. We have to take it seriously. They've shown in Paris what they can do in an organized fashion.
And in San Bernardino, he says, ISIS showed it can inspire small-scale attacks even in the United States. The president says the U.S. must be vigilant, but also that ISIS does not threaten the basic strength of the United States.
The most damage they can do, though, is if they start changing how we live and what our values are. And part of my message over the next 14 months or 13 months that I'm remain in office is to just make sure we remember who we are and make sure that our resilience, our values, our unity are maintained. If we do that, then ISIL would be defeated.
What is the public missing about your strategy? And I say that simply because, according to polls, you don't have very much approval for it.
Well, I think what's fair is that post-Paris, you had a saturation of news about the horrible attack there. And, ISIL combines viciousness with very savvy media operations. And as a consequence, if you've been watching television for the last month, all you've been seeing, all you've been hearing about is these guys with masks or black flags who are potentially coming to get you.
Are you suggesting that the media are being played, in a sense, here?
Look, the media is pursuing ratings. This is a legitimate news story. I think that it's up to the media to make a determination about how they want to cover things. There is no doubt that the actions of ISIL are designed to amplify their power and the threat that they pose. That helps them recruit. That adds in the twisted thoughts of some young person that they might want to have carry out an action, that somehow they're part of a larger movement. And so I think that the American people absorb that, understandably are of concern. Now, on our side, I think that there is a legitimate criticism of what I've been doing and our administration's been doing in the sense that we haven't, on a regular basis, I think, described all the work that we've been doing for more than a year now to defeat ISIL.
The president says 9,000 airstrikes have been conducted against ISIS over time. He notes that U.S. allies, especially Kurdish forces, have recaptured much ISIS territory, and he dismisses critics who insist he should be using more force.
When you listen to them, though, and you ask, well, what exactly are you talking about? Well, we're going to bomb more. Well, who is it that you're going to bomb? Where is it that you're going to bomb? When you talk about something like carpet bombing, what do you mean?
He's referring to Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz said he wanted to carpet bomb ISIS. In a talk here on Morning Edition, Cruz added it is possible to drop thousands more bombs on Iraq and Syria. He said the U.S. had conducted larger campaigns in past wars. The president responds that excessive bombing, killing many civilians, would provoke a backlash and that it's not, quote, who we are.
I make no apologies for us wanting to do this appropriately and in a way that is consistent with American values.
You've acknowledged this requires patience. It can be a slow process. Yeah. During that slow process, there might be more attacks on the United States. In October, before San Bernardino, a Justice Department official stated that domestic terrorists were a greater threat to the United States than international groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Do you believe that still now after San Bernardino and Paris?
I don't know the exact citation that you're referring to. If you just
John Carlin on October 14th.
If you just look at the numbers, then non-Islamic, non-foreign motivated terrorist actions have killed at least as many Americans on American soil as those who are promoted by jihadists. But what we have also seen is ISIL evolve because of the sophistication of their social media to a point where they may be inspiring more attacks, even if they're self-initiated, even if they don't involve complex planning, than we would have seen 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago.
Leading candidates in both parties have suggested in one way or another that they want to be more active against this threat. What advice would you give whoever you're going to turn this room over to in a year or so?
Well, again, I would just repeat, Steve, that when you really sort through all the rhetoric, the notion more active or a stronger response.
Hillary Clinton spoke of a no-fly zone.
Well, so I was going to say, there are basically two things that I've heard people say. One would be, we're just going to bomb more. And that, I would advise, is not a wise course. You bomb ISIL, you're not trying to bomb innocent people. And that requires intelligence and confidence in our military to be able to develop the kinds of targets that we need. We're already doing special forces who are going to help us gather that intelligence and help advise and assist and train local forces so that they can go after ISIL in areas like Raqqa and Mosul. The other new thing that people have suggested would be some variation of a no-fly zone or a safe zone. This is something we've been talking about for 3 or 4 years. The challenge there is that ISIL doesn't have an air force, so the damage done there is not against ISIL, it's against the Syrian regime.
The president says that what would really make a difference is not more force, but better diplomacy, an end to Syria's years-long civil war. The United Nations has approved talks starting in January designed to bring Syria's rebels and government onto the same side in the war against ISIS.
But what I would say to my successor is that it is important not just to shoot, but to aim. And it is important in this seat to make sure that you are making your best judgments based on data, intelligence, the information that's coming from your commanders and folks on the ground, and you're not being swayed by politics.
That's part of our year-end talk with President Obama in the White House Cabinet Room. The talk was on video, which you can find on social media or at npr.org.
This week, France is making public some 200,000 documents from one of the darkest chapters in its history during World War II. In 1940, the army of Nazi Germany swept into France and occupied Paris. A hero of the First World War, Marshal Philippe Pétain, told the French people in a radio address that he had made a gift of his person to France to mitigate the country's misfortune.
Je fais à la France le don de ma personne.
He said, "It is with a breaking heart that I tell you today, we must stop fighting." Pétain made peace with the Germans, and until 1944 he led a regime based in the French spa town of Vichy. The Vichy regime administered most of southern France, while the Germans occupied the rest, and Pétain's government pursued policies that kept the Nazis satisfied. Historian Robert Paxton of Columbia University has made a study of Vichy France and joins us from New York. Welcome.
Hi.
Why are there still any documents at all of the Vichy government under wraps more than 70 years after the liberation of France?
Well, almost everything is open. The political documents, the minutes of cabinet meetings, what has been opened now and what had been closed are things that many governments still close, and that is police files and trial records of the special courts set up by Vichy, and especially interesting, the trial records of the purge trials after the war.
What questions might the French learn, then, from these documents being released this week?
Well, I think they're going to learn that an awful lot of French people changed their minds. In 1940, the Third Republic had made a miserable mess of it.
The Third Republic was what France had been from the late 19th century until the Second World War.
Yeah, many French people, of right and of left, were desperate for a new start. And Marshal Pétain's Vichy regime looked like that New Start. A couple of years later, it wasn't so evident that he was going to be able to protect them from German extortions, and it didn't look so much as though they had won the war either. And so by 43, a lot of people are shifting sides.
So people who might, by the end of the war, have been regarded as members of the resistance would have a messier history than that during the actual time.
Absolutely, and I think the career of President Mitterrand, which was rather sensational when it was revealed, is probably very typical.
Mitterrand, a socialist, really revived the French Socialist Party a couple of decades after the Second World War. It turned out he'd been a fairly active functionary of the Vichy regime.
Well, he worked for a fairly harmless agency. He worked for the agency that looked after French prisoners of war, though he was capable of some horrendous blunders when he was president. He once said that the Vichy legislation against Jews affected only foreign Jews, which was, of course, absolutely wrong. So he obviously wasn't too well informed about what is going on in the Vichy government.
40 years ago, in the 1970s, it seemed to shock the French to come to grips with the fact that there had been at least as many collaborators as there had been resistors to the German occupation. Do you think the French have come to grips with their history by